Officials presenting today, we have joining us Claire McClelland, the Director of Raising Aspirations and Supporting Learning within the department, Michael Leonard, Head of Additional Educational Needs Team, and Glenn MacDonald, Head of Tackling Educational Disadvantage Team, all within the Department of Education. So you're all very welcome here today. Thank you for giving up your time to committee on this issue. So I'll hand over to you for initial presentation of up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer from members. And we have two big briefings and a committee report to consider later in the agenda, so I would ask members to stick to 5 minutes per inquiry, and I'll try and be fairly rigid on that with all members, but I'll hand over to you, Claire, I'm assuming, in the first instance.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thank you for inviting us here today to provide an update on issues relating to attendance, including emotional based school non-attendance, or EBSNA for short, and the related issue of pathways. So as you know, I'm Claire McClelland, Director of Raising Aspirations and Supporting Learning, and the Chair has introduced Glenn and Michael, who head up the Tackling Educational Disadvantage Team and the Additional Educational Needs Team. Michael and Glenn's policy remits include attendance and also alternative provision and education other than at school. In advance of today's committee session, we have circulated a paper, and hopefully that is useful. Beginning with attendance, the department has been clear that regular pupil attendance at school is an ongoing challenge, which was significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And whilst the majority of pupils do attend school regularly, since the pandemic there are a growing number of children and young people who within our schools for various reasons find it difficult to attend school every day, find it very challenging and may need extra support. This time last year, I highlighted that recent trends in the level of pupil absence in schools were concerning, and in particular the number of pupils with persistent absence. I have provided the committee with the most recently published attendance data, and whilst there are some marginal improvements, the position does remain concerning. The department is currently consulting on the draft Attendance Matters strategy, and this new strategy focuses on 6 priority areas. Firstly, promoting a nurturing environment to understand and reduce emotional-based school non-attendance, ensuring inclusive strategies to promote positive behaviour, using data to identify vulnerable children and young people and delivering early interventions, understanding why children are missing from formal education and taking steps to address this, piloting a whole community approach to improving attendance, transforming support for school and other settings. So the strategy sets out the continued importance of regular attendance at school in enhancing the life chances of children and young people, particularly those who are struggling with attending in that post-pandemic world. The consultation period that launched on the 8th of December will run until the 6th of March. We've already received over 1,200 responses to that. And as part of the consultation, we are undertaking a range of public events right across Northern Ireland aimed at school staff, aimed at parents and children, and a range of other interested parties. We will be having further online events specifically to gather the views of teachers and school leaders. And in addition to that strategy, EA have produced a new self-evaluation document called Attendance Matters, a practical guide to improving attendance together. And this enables schools to identify their strengths and weaknesses regarding pupil attendance and provides practical solutions to improving the areas identified by schools. And this was issued to schools at the start of the last academic year. In terms of emotional-based school non-attendance, this is an umbrella term that covers a range of issues. So emotional-based school non-attendance has emerged as a challenging and complex issue that makes it difficult for children facing issues such as anxiety to maintain regular attendance at school. From the commencement of this academic year, schools are able to record pupil absence due to EBSNA with a specific absence code. We introduced this to help us better understand the issue and indeed the scale across the system. The department is also recommending that school settings advise their education welfare officer in cases where this attendance code is applied, and this is to ensure that every avenue is explored at the earliest opportunity to re-engage that child and address the needs. In conjunction with the pupil and with the parent, the School and Education Welfare Service should consider the most appropriate educational option on an individual basis. Education Authority's Education Psychology is providing training for schools and EA staff on emotional-based non-attendance. To date, 245 school staff across primary and post-primary schools have received training. 15 staff have also received additional motivational interview training. A further 271 corporate staff in the Education Authority have been trained, with 103 staff in EA attending that additional MI training. All education welfare staff receive comprehensive training in terms of emotional-based school non-attendance. The department recognises that in some circumstances, despite school-based interventions, an alternative pathway may be suitable for some children and young people who may have disengaged from education. In these circumstances, alternative education provision, or AEP for short, may be appropriate. Alternative provision can be defined as structured educational opportunities provided outside mainstream school settings for children and young people who, without such provision, would not otherwise access suitable education. Alternative provision includes education otherwise than at school, or EOTIS, for pupils with social, emotional, behavioural, medical or other issues. Article 86 of the Education NI Order 1998 places a statutory duty on the EA to make arrangements for the provision of a suitable education at school or otherwise for those children of compulsory school age who, by reason of illness, expulsion from school or otherwise, may not receive a suitable education unless those arrangements are put in place for them. EOTIS is very different from mainstream school, and while it's definitely concerned with educational progress, there's a focus on helping children and young people address and overcome social, behavioural, emotional and wellbeing difficulties, or indeed other barriers that are preventing them from accessing learning. The committee briefing paper, which you received, provides a more detail on how EOTIS provision is structured and how it is delivered. EOTIS remains a critical part of the continuum support for children and young people. However, there is a wider strategic aim to minimise reliance on EOTIS through strength and inclusive practice and early intervention. With this in mind, and given the most recent departmental EOTIS guidance dates back to 2014, the Department and the Education Authority have agreed to initiate a review of EOTIS with the aim of developing a strategic vision for the future of EOTIS provision, incorporating an updated policy framework which was better aligned to the inclusive education principles and SEN reform. While statutory responsibility for delivering EOTIS rests with the EA, in recent years a range of alternative provisions operating outside the formal education system have emerged. This provision is primarily based around community-led approaches which aim to serve specific cohorts of young people who struggle to access statutory provision. The need for alternative education models to better support those cohorts of children and young people who do not thrive in traditional school environments and who therefore may be at increased risk of disengaging with mainstream education was consistently highlighted as an issue during the RAISE programme's engagement with educational settings, communities, children, young people and families right across Northern Ireland. In addition, the Department's wider reform agenda, as set out in the Transform Ed strategy, prioritises tackling educational disadvantage, raising standards and ensuring equity across the system. Against this backdrop, alternative education provision has the potential to play a critical role in supporting some of our most vulnerable learners, reducing barriers to participation and contributing to improved outcomes for those at risk of exclusion or persistent non-attendance. The Department is therefore progressing a RAISE initiative, a cross-cutting initiative focused on alternative education provision. There are two elements to this work. Firstly, a piece of external research which aims to explore the current alternative provision landscape in Northern Ireland and in other jurisdictions, including the degree to which these are integrated into mainstream education, to identify the needs of young people in Northern Ireland accessing this support. Queen's University has recently been appointed to undertake this research on behalf of the Department. The second element relates to the design and establishment of small-scale alternative provision pilots in 2 RAISE localities. Officials are currently undertaking scoping of these pilot projects through engagement with RAISE locality representatives on draft proposals which were brought forward through the strategic area plan process. Following delivery of the pilots, an evaluation will be undertaken to understand the effectiveness of these models in improving engagement, aspiration and achievement amongst disadvantaged learners. This RAISE cross-cutting initiative will be critical in informing the Department's understanding of and the future decisions in relation to alternative provision. In closing, I recognise that attendance at school continues to be challenging for many learners. In this context, it is essential that the Department and the EA redouble efforts to ensure that appropriate supports are in place for children and young people to attend school every day. Attendance matters will be pivotal in setting the strategic direction and related actions to help this. In some circumstances, despite school-based interventions and supports, some children and young people do disengage from education. In order to meet the needs of these learners, it is essential that EOTIS and alternative provision more broadly delivers the right support in the right place and at the right time. The work being initiated by the Department on the review of EOTIS and alternative provision research and pilots will be critical in ensuring that these needs are met. Thank you. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. And conscious we have the EA in afterwards, so we'll try not to stray into the operational stuff, but obviously the policy and the operational context are connected. I wanted to ask you about some of the data that you had around emotional-based school non-attendance. Certainly anecdotally, and I know we shouldn't make policy based on anecdotal evidence, but in terms of contact at the committee, contact at local level, and even feedback from principals, the message comes through quite clearly that this is a big issue and one that schools and parents are often really struggling to manage. But the figures in your report suggest it's only reflects 1%, I think, of all absences. How confident are you in that data that is accurately reflecting the amount of children either not in school or struggling with attendance in relation to those issues?
Okay, so first of all, the data that we shared is management information. It's not verified data. It's picked up from the system. And in terms of the overall instances where emotional-based school non-attendance has been recorded as a code, it is less than 1% of the total absences. This is a new code. This is a new code that's been introduced for schools, so there may be schools that are not confident in using that, etc., etc. So we continue to give advice to schools on that. We field quite a number of queries of when it's appropriate to use that. I think we'd be in a better position once we have a full year of information, a full year of data to see where that sits. But it is early days. It has only been introduced from September. But at the minute, in terms of the wider picture, we have a far greater number of children and young people who are missing days of school through illness or through unauthorised absences than we do through emotional-based school non-attendance.
Do you think there is any, do you have any sense, or do you think there is any risk that there are children possibly on reduced timetables or under some sort of informal arrangement of informal suspensions perhaps that aren't being recorded?
So in terms of reduced timetables, this is a matter that has been brought to the department's attention on a number of occasions, and there is anecdotal evidence that is the case. And I suppose, for the benefit of members, there are temporary exceptions from the curriculum can only be put in place in certain circumstances. Under legislation, those circumstances include, for example, where there is an emotional health and wellbeing issue, etc., etc. So there are circumstances where a young person can have a reduced access to the curriculum or reduced hours in schools. That has to be agreed. That should be agreed with the young person. That should be agreed with the parents, etc., etc. And of course, children and young people are entitled to a certain amount of education. In primary school, that is 3 hours. In post-primary school, that is 4.5 hours. So it is an issue that has been raised with the department. It is one that is very difficult for us to determine the level of, I suppose, the extent of the issue, because what sometimes is happening, we're hearing anecdotal information that a pupil may be marked present, and there may be when they're on a reduced timetable. To try and address that, we have put out new guidance this year. We have highlighted that in our guidance this year, and we have introduced another new code to try and encourage schools to record where there's circumstances where a child has been put onto, where there's an exception to the curriculum, that is recorded. And again, in terms of the numbers that we're seeing coming through, we're monitoring that. They are quite low, again, less than 1% coming through in the management statistics. But look, we recognise that there is an issue there. And
can I ask, do you think more can be done at departmental level to really engage at a school level in terms of understanding, are schools following processes correctly? Is there anything in the system that is disincentivising schools from recording things accurately, or that where compliance might be patchy? Is there any work that the department's doing to try and address that?
Yeah, so whenever we get the attendance statistics, we go through them on a monthly basis and we identify schools where we may think there are issues. We speak to those schools, we work with those schools, we put support in place. One of the other things that we've been doing is where we hear reports of reduced timetables. So for example, if some of our other education partners are highlighting where there might be an issue, we have been asking to share the details so we can follow up. So if we have specific details of where that is happening and where it may be happening for a particular reason, we're really keen to follow that up. So if there are, I suppose, we encourage individuals to share that. But again, it's very much, you know, about encouraging schools to use those codes. It's about trying to identify trends and challenging that.
I'm aware of an example, not named schools or individuals, but where a case came to my attention. Really quite chronic issues with attendance. It was around a whole range of issues, including SEN and anxiety with school attendance. When I engaged with the EA on that, they were like, we're not aware of this young person, and so whatever, somewhere in the system the school had not engaged with the appropriate service that you would think would automatically kick in there. So is there something that disincentivises schools from doing that? Is there something in terms of how that data is recorded or reflects on them that would mean that schools would be reluctant to do that? Is there anything you're aware of in the system? And I'm not. It's not a question where I have something in my back pocket to hit. It's just to get a sense. Is there anything in the system?
Yeah, I think what we can do is just reinforce what the legislation, what the position in terms of legislation is. We can reinforce in terms of what the position in terms of recording attendance, etc. is. So it's about supporting schools to make sure that number one, that they are recording and reporting appropriately, but it's also making sure that they have the support to support those children and young people. And, you know, in instances like you describe, you know, we'd be more than happy if there is to look at individual cases, and we have done with EA, where maybe the issue has been raised that, oh, this individual child is on a reduced timetable, we don't think they should be, and we will follow that up with individual schools, and that's part of getting that picture and trying to understand that. But
just one other question from me, and it's really just in advance of the EA coming in, because I understand they can really only speak to operational matters and not policy. Their briefing paper covers the issue of prosecutions of parents in relation to non-attendance. Is there any intention within the department to review that legislation in terms of just how old it is? I think a lot of it dates back to the 1940s. In terms of whether it's in keeping with good practice in other jurisdictions. Is that something that's on the department's agenda at all?
So it is something, and I'm aware of the Autism Reviewers paper. We only received it last night, so we will review that and we'll take on board what is raised in that. It is not something that is on the agenda at present, but it is something that absolutely may be considered coming out of the attendance strategy. But we haven't got any plans at the present time to review legislation. But again, the consultation may throw up things that we will change the approach, and we will reflect in the approach going forward.
Just ask two other questions on that, and then I'll bring others in. One of the things that came through that briefing from the Autism Reviewer was just really that the statutory, the legal test for being potentially liable for prosecution is quite low. It's being able to demonstrate a regular attendance. Once that bar is hit, there's quite a limited amount of statutory defences, so parents are often left in a scenario they really have no means of defending themselves at all. It's not like being convicted of a crime where there's you have a defence barrister and you have the opportunity to bring your defence and go through those processes. It seems to be fairly low bar of proving the offence. In terms of whether or not that's appropriate in 2026, given the complexity of emotional-based school non-attendance that we're aware of, would that not give the department pause for thought that perhaps we do need to do a check on this to make sure that we're treating parents equitably? We obviously need to prioritise attendance, and nobody should minimise that, and I'm not attempting to minimise the importance of attendance, to ensure that we're actually following good practice and something that actually supports the child at the centre of this to attend, rather than being just a blunt instrument that's punitive, perhaps without clarity on what its impact is. Okay,
so firstly, I suppose on prosecutions, I think it's probably really important to say the number of prosecutions is fairly low. It's significantly less than 100 on an annual basis. So the number of prosecutions is low, and we have asked EA, and we have asked EA for assurances, and EA provided assurances that prosecution is only a last resort. Every other option is exhausted before they go down that prosecution route, and EWS do try to work with the families. In terms of the first part of your question, as I said, we received the report from the Autism Reviewer last night. We will go through that, and we will look to see if there are any changes that need to be made on the back of that.
Just the final point then, you referenced that the EA have given you assurances. do you think there's any need for independent oversight around that service? We are taking criminal action against someone, criminal record, it's a serious intervention. Do you think that Criminal Justice Inspector of Northern Ireland perhaps might be appropriate to be involved in this space, or some other mechanism to have oversight of those processes rather than relying entirely on an internal EA process? Would that be appropriate in your mind?
Well, you suppose, it's something that we can absolutely consider, but in terms of the prosecution process, that is a matter that is taken forward with the courts. There are structures, there are structures that that goes through. If there are other elements that we have to put in place or need to put in place or need to review in that, we'd be very happy to look at that. But the Education Authority, as I said, they have given assurances that they, in terms of taking prosecutions forward, it is as a last resort, and it is within a framework of interventions.
I'll leave it at that. I think other members will want to come in. Deputy Chair, and then other indications.
And thanks, Claire. And there's a disparity in attendance when it comes to grammar and non-grammar. I think there's a difference of about 5%. Has the department directed extra resources to those schools that are experiencing the worst levels of attendance?
Okay, so first of all, yeah, there is, you're absolutely right, there is a disparity between grammar and non-grammar attendance, and that continues in the latest statistics. In terms of targeting funding, etc., so we have the tackling educational disadvantage funding, so targeting social need funding, extended schools funding, the RAISE programme, and in terms of schools very much target that at a range of initiatives, including attendance.
And can I just intervene there at that point? Well, first of all, the RAISE programme isn't up and running yet, as far as I'm aware. There's still an appeal ongoing. But in any event, it's only a limited number of years funding, and I'm more concerned about more structural devices that would be used to combat non-attendance. And the issues you raised there are sort of, scattergun impact. The funding's given out to these different funding streams, but nothing specifically in relation to attendance. I'm just wondering, in the south, I'm sure you're familiar with the DAESH schools, and in those schools they have liaison officers who regularly interact with families where there are attendance problems in terms of the children. I'm just wondering, are there any suggestions of anything like that happening in the department?
Absolutely. So in terms of the RAISE programme is absolutely up and running. The RAISE programme, we're about to issue letters of offer in West Belfast in particular.
I know, but it's limited time. I mean, this attendance issue has been going on for quite a while, and I suppose what I want to know is, what specifically is the department doing about attendance? The RAISE funding isn't aimed at attendance, or lack of attendance, or non-attendance. It's across the board on underachievement. So, in terms of policies within the department, something more structural that's going to be there on a permanent basis?
Well, the attendance matters strategy that we're consulting on will be the framework. It will set out the strategy and the vision, and the list of areas that I outlined will be core to that. But alongside that, it's initiatives like RAISE, it's initiatives like extended schools that schools can tailor and put into place supports to deal on a local basis. So you mentioned DAESH, you mentioned homeschool liaison. I think it's about 16 out of the 18 RAISE localities highlighted some type of family homeschool liaison type role in their strategic area plans. That's something that through RAISE that we will be able to look at funding a pilot to see how it works, how that whole community approach works as well. So there are opportunities to complement the wider strategy with individual programmes to help support attendance. And I think the key thing is, attendance differs. The attendance challenges differ from school to school. They differ from area to area. For example, in West Belfast, the department is working with West Belfast Partnership Board, the principal groups, to identify what are the specific issues in that area. And on the back of that, the things that have come through is around messaging One of the successful projects in Raise is going to be an attendance campaign specifically targeted in West Belfast. And there's another project that is targeting Key Stage 2 attendance. So combined with that wider, the wider disadvantage package of funding, the attendance strategy, and those individual projects, that's how we should shift, hope to shift some of that attendance.
Absolutely commend that interaction with the likes of the West Belfast Partnership Board and organisations in other areas that have the interests of children and young people at heart. And can I ask specifically if you have looked at anything in any other jurisdiction around combating non-attendance, like the example I've already given of the day schools in the south?
Absolutely. So one of we sit on a Four Nations group on attendance. We regularly engage, and I think it's probably important to highlight that the issues that are coming through here are evident across both these islands and across the rest of the world. So we are part of that. We are involved in a range of other initiatives, and the other piece is, and through the RAISE programme, one of the core elements of RAISE is shared learning. So one of the key things that we do is we meet regularly with our colleagues in the south to share learning. We have had a forum on attendance, we've had engagement on attendance. In the south, they have just recently launched a new attendance campaign. We are taking lessons from that, but equally they are looking at our data and looking at what we are doing to see if there are lessons learned, and that's all feeding into the Attendance Matters strategy. That's all feeding into those initiatives. So absolutely, it's really important to learn lessons from.
Thanks for that. Just one
briefly.
Final question. In your briefing paper, you said if a child is happy in school, they'll feel a sense of belonging, feel safe and supported, and will want to attend. And I think everybody could absolutely agree with this. That sense of safety, emotional well-being and so on is absolutely vital when it comes to getting children into school. But this minister took a decision to withdraw departmental guidance that previously existed to support transgender pupils in school. And that is a vulnerable group of students, and how does that help? How does the minister's decision in regard to withdrawing that guidance in any way help ensure the attendance of those children in school?
So first of all, the minister, when he withdrew the guidance and he put his policy statement out, made clear the rationale and the reasons why he asked for that guidance to be withdrawn, and that was because there were elements of that which were unlawful. Did
you think that was a good idea? Do you think that in any way helped this group of vulnerable children?
So in terms of that group of vulnerable children and all groups of vulnerable children, there are a range of supports in place. The Education Authority in particular remain available to give advice to schools where they need advice to support the individual groups. But there's additional services that are all of the services that existed initially are still in place. So we have the Addressing Bullying in Schools team. We have those other services through EA. We have our emotional health and wellbeing programmes. So the removal of that guidance was for a particular reason, and the minister has outlined his rationale for that. But again, the services and the supports are available for schools.
And would you say that the withdrawal of that guidance would have had no impact at all?
I can't comment on that. We haven't had any. We have had limited feedback on the impact of the guidance, but. It was a ministerial decision.
Thanks,
Chair. Deputy Chair dropped a big question in there right at the end there, so I'm going to ask other members to make sure we gave the witnesses the opportunity to answer that, but asking members to try and keep time as far as possible from here on in. Cathy, you had indicated next.
Sure. We know that a lot of these children who are facing emotional-based school non-attendance are children who are either diagnosed or undiagnosed or awaiting a diagnosis around special educational needs. And I have to be honest, I've been completely overwhelmed with the stories that I've heard from parents and children around their whole experience. Horrific stories, actually. And whilst I'm really glad that it's now being discussed, and Claire, I know you've met directly with parents, around this, and I do welcome that. But I regret that there's so many children who have been impacted up until this point. There's still concern around a number of things. And the first thing is around placements. Like, do you agree that many of the cases of emotional based school non-attendance are caused because the EA and the department are placing children, getting them off lists, placing them in places that just are not meeting their needs and are not able to meet their needs? Would you agree with that?
So obviously special educational needs isn't within my policy area, but and I know you had a briefing last week, and you'll have briefings coming forward. But in terms of meeting the needs of children and young people, of course, there are some instances where their needs are not being met. But the Minister has totally continued to reiterate his commitment to ensuring all children with a statement or waiting for a statement have an appropriate school placement that meets their needs. In terms of the EA, you'll be aware that there's been over 6,000 additional SEN places created between 2020 and 2025, and the work continues in that regard. So that, combined with the work we're doing, I hope will help that situation, and will help to ensure that some of the experiences that the parents that you have met, and some of those experiences have been really difficult for not only the children but the families as well. And I was with the group of parents again last week, and we talked to them directly about the Attendance Matters strategy and how we could reflect their experiences on that. So hopefully, the work that's ongoing in terms of the SEN reform piece and the work around the Attendance Matters strategy will address some of those issues.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that work's going on, but the reality, I suppose, from what we're hearing, especially around special educational needs, is that that's not translating. And I know you're not here to speak about that, but some of the strategies and different things policies that you've referenced don't seem to be reaching those who need it. And like I can use many examples from parents that we've heard from. I know the committee has heard in informal sessions and stuff as well, and it just doesn't seem to be translating. It doesn't seem to be reaching those families. And one of the things that they've raised with me, which I think is a really key issue and a really easy one, is just around even language that's being used, and parents feeling that they are being blamed for their children not being at school when they are doing everything that within their power. And rather than it being recognised as the child communicating their trauma and their needs not being met, it's being like the blame's just being put on the child or on the parents. So that's a simple thing around language that can be changed or acknowledged even. How do you propose that this strategy is going to recognise that?
So in terms of the strategy, and we have had conversations around what the strategy is called, how things are framed. I think one of the key challenges is the Attendance Matters strategy is about all children and young people. So if we look at attendance more broadly, we have a significant issue with persistent and non-attendance, so chronic and severe chronic attendance. Those children and young people who are missing more than 10% of their school days. And that's for a number of reasons. So we are trying to put in place a strategy that recognises that there are children and young people that have significant difficulties, for example, EBSNA, and really can't attend school, really find it difficult to attend school. But we're also recognising that there are a range of other reasons that children and young people don't attend school. We still have a significant issue with holidays being taken in term time, the numbers in terms of family holiday not agreed.
And I appreciate all that, but I suppose I'm wanting to focus more so on those children that are to do with emotional based school non-attendance. Do you, like, we're talking again, you mentioned there around early intervention. I know that features quite heavily in the consultation as well. Do you think that the lack of early intervention has attributed it to the scale that it's at now?
I think
absolutely.
In terms of emotional based school non-attendance, the main attributing factor, and this really has emerged post pandemic. So I think the pandemic and the impact potentially of school closures, the impact of all of the things that were happening in society has had a really major issue. So absolutely, early intervention is key. Early intervention is where we want to be with EWS, but I think there's a range of things have played into this. But I think, Absolutely, and just back to your point in terms of the language, we will take on board the views that come through in the Attendance Matters strategy, and we'll take on board as far as we can. But remembering that it's trying to deal with a whole range of issues. But I did assure the parents, last week that we would look at their suggestions and we'd see what we could take on board. But I think there's a whole lot of issues at play here, and there's not one single. I don't think there's one single issue, and there's not one single solution.
Right,
Thank you, Cathy. Danny, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. It would be fair to say that it's the system that is failing our young people and making them vulnerable rather than young people being vulnerable. And I do say that around, just following what Cathy said, around placements. And you talked a lot about attendance, but what I didn't hear was the difference between if you were to take a school and say don't include the SPIMS as part of their attendance, the difference. So could a school be at an attendance of around 96%, but if you include the SPIMS in that, they could drop as low as 90% or 89%?
Mm-hmm. So the team, in terms of the Attendance Matters consultation, were in West Belfast last week, and that issue exactly was raised by one of the principals there. So last week we met with a group of P6s at St John the Baptist Primary. We met with the Peter at St Peter's Immaculata Youth Club, and the primary and post-primary principals, and that's one of the issues that they've raised. So certainly it's something that we can look at.
That's huge. Something to look at. I think that's actually not good enough, because just how you answered Cathy around the minister's doing what he's trying to do with saying and all that. But placements and early interventions, it's very clear year on year. This isn't about the pandemic. It may be playing a role in it, but long before that, children have been misplaced. And if the same schools are doing all the heavy lifting, like areas which was referenced earlier on for yourself when you answered Pat around West Belfast, the schools in West Belfast and how great the school leaders are, and the people who work for the likes of West Belfast Partnership Board, they're doing the heavy lifting. It isn't officials, it certainly isn't the minister. And that is a big problem, because they are trying to cater for everything that's so hard in the system right now, and other schools aren't. And that's where we're seeing a disparity when you go into the grammar and non-grammar. The grammar schools in West Belfast have an attendance that is really high compared to some of the non-grammar. Why is that? Because they're doing the heavy lifting. And I was listening attentively to your presentation and how you answered, and you didn't even mention it. And I'm bringing it up now. That's a problem. It's not being mentioned, and I don't think you have a handle on it, and haven't had a handle on it for years. And that's not me blaming nuclear. That's me blaming the very top here. That's the chief executive of the EA, and that's also the minister.
I suppose we recognise that there are challenges and issues with the system, and that's why there's the range of reforms in place.
Reforms and strategies.
The range of reforms are in place. That's why we're moving forward with Transform Ed. That's why we're moving forward with SEN reform,
okay.
etc. But
you just mentioned Transform Ed. I wasn't going to bring it up. If you listen to any, especially the oldest centres and those who run that, and you talk to school leaders, one of the biggest concerns they have with Transform Ed is the actual removal that it could have to pastoral care, to that pathways for our younger people when we're putting high stake exams in there. It seems to me that you're talking in an echo chamber, that officials who are and the minister who are championing this curriculum reform are not getting it for the most vulnerable children, for our children with additional needs, and our children coming from backgrounds that are more difficult, and newcomer children. They are being completely ignored in all of this, and we are once again going after those who are attending school, those coming from the more affluent backgrounds, those who don't have the challenges. And that's the same with attendance. That's the problem. Schools in socially deprived areas are doing all the heavy lifting where the others aren't. And that's not me pitting grammar against non-grammar. This is about me telling absolute truth, what's on the ground right now. It's the same schools are doing the same lifting, and it's our school leaders and it's our community and voluntary sector that is actually leading the way and giving these children a chance. It is certainly not the department, and it's certainly not the Education Authority, and it certainly isn't this minister and the chief executive.
So, in terms of Transform Ed, there's nothing in Transform Ed that suggests removing anything to do with EOTAS or pastoral care, etc. There's a focus on wellbeing, there's a focus on tackling educational disadvantage, etc.
You're going to be setting it up for a high stake exam when you remove coursework could be getting removed from it, but also then the AS levels. The EOTAS centres, again, I'm probably going to run out of time here, but there we had an announcement that came out of the blue to say that the EA were not going to be sending referrals to the community and voluntary sector of EOTAS. Like, I have one in my constituency which actually supports children from the minister's constituency and has done for nearly 3 decades. Their doors will close in June. I think it's a massive slap in the face when officials come in here all the time and you all sound great with it, but the reality on the ground is, personally, I don't think you get it, and you're going to continue to fail young people, and it's going to be the same young people that are failed. It is a system that's failing them, and making them vulnerable, and not them themselves. And too much blame then gets put on parents, and it's not fair. And you can throw all the money in the world you want at raise and do billboards and do at different key stages. See, if we don't address those issues with placements, forget about it. It's a waste of money.
I suppose that the issues with placements are being addressed, and in terms of raise,
Now, there's going to be hundreds of children again this year that won't be placed.
But in terms of raise, what we're taking forward in raise, and we'll use West Belfast as an example, what is in that strategic area plan is what your community has put in that strategic area plan. That plan was developed by,
I have no doubt that some might have a wee bit of
Here,
it
so
working
it's
with
whether
it, yeah.
maybe just to
But it's that
to finish our
disparity
point,
of
yeah.
that difference, right? So I just went and give an example, and you just confirmed that it was brought up by a principal. So if a school is at 96% attendance and can drop as low as 90% once you take the spins out of it, that tells me that's your big problem. You're answering people around wee 1%. That's huge. That's like a summer holiday off school.
But that's an issue.
So for time to give Claire the opportunity to respond, and then we'll move on to the
So
next
that's
one.
an issue. The issue has been raised by principals, and we said as part of the consultation, absolutely we'll take that away. We'll look at that. We'll look and see if there's anything that we can do.
You should know this.
When we do know, we look at our attendance stats on a daily basis, and the thing is, a child in a specialist provision may or may not be statemented. All of the issues and all the challenges around that were discussed with those principals. But again, we committed that as part of that wider consultation, we'll look at the issues raised with principals, by the principals. That's the whole, that's the whole point of the consultation, is to find out from the principals, find out from communities, find out from families,
I'll have to just draw a line at this
what
stage.
the
That's
actions
me
are.
from just in my constituency office. I don't need a consultation to tell me where the feelings in the system
I'll
are.
have to just draw a line, Danny, on that one. So next indication was from Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the panel for being here. Attendance seems to be a topic that just keeps reappearing. So it's good to get some clarity today. One contributing factor to non-attendance, of course, is childcarers having to be childcarers. Some of it may be linked directly to having to care for a sick parent, a parent with a disability, a parent who is an addict, a parent with mental illness, and not all children will want to volunteer that information to teachers, to principals, or to teams like yourself. I'd just like to know, when it comes to attendance and pathways for those children, what way can you support them?
Okay, so young carers is an issue that we have been focused on in the last, I suppose 18 months. We've done a lot of work with Action for Children in terms of putting resources in place. And you're absolutely right. Where a child is a young carer, very often they don't want to say that they're a young carer. They don't want their peers to know that they have caring responsibilities. So we have worked with those children and young people. We have developed a poster which is available in school. We have encouraged updated guidance to try and encourage schools to engage and to make a space where young carers feel that they can say, and also given advice to schools on supporting young carers. Part of the Education Welfare Service transformation programme, there will be a dedicated individual responsible for young carers who will be able to directly advise schools on that. So do recognise absolutely as an issue, it's a challenge for those young people. But working with Action for Children and Bernardo's, we have been able to put in place some resources. Hopefully that should go some way to addressing some of those challenges. The other thing, I sit on the cross-departmental carers group, and we were able actually to bring that issue to that group, and we actually had 2 children and young people from St Ronan's College who have been I suppose really brilliant advocates for young carers, and they came along and actually spoke to the senior officials across departments about this issue. So there's some headway being made in terms of raising the issues about young carers, and we'll continue to work with those organisations and children and young people to see if there's anything additional that we can put in place.
That's great. Yeah, I really welcome that. I was speaking with a young carer recently who had said in their experience they wished at the start of every year in September schools would hand out confidential piece of paper to say, are you a child carer? Is there someone in the home that has an addiction problem? Are you experiencing domestic violence in the home? Something of that nature, so that the data, the logging and the support, most importantly, could be provided. Lastly, then I have one more question on.
I was just going to say we're going to be including young carers on the school census from the new academic year, so they'll be included for the first time. So that will give us that level of data around attendance, attainment, and that sort of thing. So that will be, I think that will be a good step forward. I know from England, for example, attendance and attainment for young carers is one of the lowest of any sort of cohort of children. So we'll now be able to get a baseline in terms of that data to understand those challenges a bit more fully.
That's brilliant. It's about giving them equal access to opportunity and recognising the barriers that they face to education due to what's going on at home. But just lastly then, with non-school attendance and transitioning, I'm just curious about what kind of data is currently available on how many children are now in full-time homeschool education as their needs weren't met in school. Do we have that to hand?
So certainly there has been a significant increase in the number of children and young people that have been registered for the purposes of elective home education. And clearly that's a choice for a parent. That's a choice I know that parents don't take lightly. But the numbers have increased significantly in the past number of years. So for example, in 2024, 2025, in terms of the figures that are known to the Education Authority, so it's important that this is only the numbers that are known to the Education Authority. So when a child deregisters from school, there is a form completed, because it's called the SA1 form. It's completed by the school and it's sent to the Education Authority. And where it has been recorded that the child is going to be electively home educated, there's in the region just over 800 pupils in 2024, 2025. So there are a significant number. Again, that is a parental decision. The Education Authority, in terms of elective home education, are available to provide, advice. There is some guidance in place. They're available to provide some advice to parents if they need that. But there has been a significant rise in numbers of parents choosing to home educate.
And can I just ask lastly, and then I'll hand you back to the chair off the back of that.
It just need to be a final point, Cara. Yeah.
Yep. Do we have, statistically speaking, the reason why people have chosen to be homeschooled, whether it's bullying or that they felt their children's needs weren't being met?
Not statistically speaking. We would have some anecdotal feedback as to why parents choose to home educate, and there are a whole host of issues and a whole host of reasons. But statistically, we don't have anything to say of those X percent. This is how many chose to home educate for a particular reason.
Okay, it's something we can bring to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. John, you'd indicated.
One question on training, and then I just want to touch on the prosecutions. You note that emotionally based special needs absence training for schools and EA staff is not mandatory, and how do you therefore assure consistency in terms of the support given to pupils and teachers?
So in terms of the training that's available for schools, the only I suppose the training that is mandated is child protection and safeguarding training. Schools have the option of looking at the suite of training that's available through the EA and identifying what suits their context. So it wouldn't be our intention to mandate that. What we will do is we'll encourage as many schools as possible to take up that training. But it's not something that we would intend to mandate.
But the parents could end up prosecuted.
In terms of emotional based school non-attendance?
Yeah.
So in terms of prosecutions, the prosecution piece is, usually after, and again, Education Welfare Service are coming after, and they are the area within EA are responsible for that. But in terms of prosecutions, usually prosecutions are after a really long process where there have been, not necessarily related to emotional based school non-attendance, where there have been persistent issues in terms of non-attendance and engagement with the family, engagement with the parents, etc. That has not worked. So
document could I get that has that long engagement, the objective factors that you would decide before
So the Education Authority will be able, the Education Welfare Service will be able to set out all of the steps that they take before that they decide that, following that they would go down the prosecution route.
Just because I want to probe this at a strategic level before getting into the operational stuff for the EA. Because the EA is actually akin to the PPS. They're making the prosecutorial decisions. The same as the Post Office made the prosecutorial decisions around the Horizon scandal and prosecuted wrongly a lot of people. Now, you said only 100 people were prosecuted a year. Northern Ireland. Well, nationally it was about 150 for Post Office, and that was a major scandal. So those numbers might be small, but they're high impact. That's the first thing. Now, one of the concerns I have is about arbitrariness, okay? Because this is a strict liability offence. And I'm not anti-prosecution. I do think we need to get parents taking responsibility. But how do we safeguard when there is no clear transparency about what is the evidential standard applied? What are the public interest tests applied? What is last resort? And what are the objective factors? Because the PPS have that for their prosecutorial code. Okay. If we don't have that for the EA, then you can have a situation where if anyone in this room, you could simply pick one person. By the time they get to court, that's fine. They will be dealt with, as you said. The court system has its own procedures. But what is to make sure there's fairness between how you decided to pick Danny and not pick me? Because once I'm picked, I'm not up to the standard of child being regularly at school. I'm basically convicted. But the key is, because I don't see any transparency around your decision making, as to how do we make sure that I'm fairly picked. And that is a key problem when you take this outside the PPS and you give it to the EA. And the EA, as far as I can see online, and what the Autistic Independent Reviewer says, is there's no guidance for what these objective factors are to support an investigation. So are they arbitrary, or are they written down objectively?
So as I said, in terms of the Autism Reviewer report, we only received it last night. We'll consider that.
But these pre-existed the Autism Reviewer. She's just pointed it out. But I mean, before that, you've been prosecuting people since the EA, since when? The Butler Act.
Yeah, 1940s. Yeah.
Right, so let's pretend the EA, the Independent Autism Reviewer, doesn't exist and didn't send us that. You've still been prosecuting people since the 40s.
Yeah, so in terms of
where's the documents that tell me what are the objective factors that decide what is last resort, so that they're consistently applied to everybody? And second of all, where's the disclosure responsibilities on the EA in terms of making sure there's a fair trial?
Okay, so
that would apply under the criminal code.
So look, as I said, we have asked EA for assurances in terms of their processes. They have given us assurances in terms of the steps that they go through before approaching prosecution. In terms of what the Autism Reviewer has said in terms of the issues you've raised, if there are additional steps, if there are pieces of information that we need to develop, we need to bring forward, we can do that. But in terms of what the actual steps that the EA take, EA, Education Welfare Service folks that are coming in next will be able to set those out in detail for you. That sits that
not online. So how do the public know?
With the Education Authority. But again,
parents know if they're going through this. Where is this set out? Because the PPS have a code, and the PPS code will say what are the objective tests for public interest, what are the objective tests for the evidential standard. But I mean, I'm now going to ask. I'm not going to get prosecuted because children are grown up, but you're telling me that since 1944 these haven't been set down in a document, and the disclosure responsibilities if you're prosecuting someone aren't sitting down somewhere.
They may well be in the Education Authority, and that's what we'll pick that up with the Education Authority on the back of the Autism Reviewer's report. But it's not something that the department has published, as she has identified, and it's certainly not something that the Education Authority has published to date. If there's a gap there, we'll address that, absolutely. But again, as I said, I haven't fully read the report, but haven't fully considered the implications, haven't developed any advice on that.
As you sit above the EA, what we're going to find them is I can't get the assurance from you that therefore people who should have been prosecuted have been, and people who shouldn't have been prosecuted haven't been. And there could be a lot of arbitrariness in this decision making, because once you're actually put in front of the court, there's really no defence, because the strict liability offence and the threshold is very, very low. Has your child been a regular tender? And what I'm concerned about is someone whose child isn't a regular tender because they're the star rugby player, or they've got a sporting issue like Rory McIlroy wasn't a good attender. Thankfully, he's now a champion golfer. But if he had been a working class boy with no skills, with his parents have ended up in court, and that's the sort of arbitrariness that we need to make sure doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, as I said, EA have assured the department that in terms of prosecutions, they are only in very exceptional circumstances there when all other avenues have been exhausted. But as I said, if there's gaps in terms of the information that needs to be published, we will look at that and we'll address that.
I'll ask the EA. Look forward to it. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, John. David, you're indicated next.
Thanks very much, Chair. And you touched on some of the community-based interventions that we're seeing for those that struggle with the school-based interventions. We've had a couple of programmes and Phoenix from my own constituency in with us previously. But I was just wondering what engagement the department has with the bodies that provide that service, or the community organisations that provide that service, and whether there's anything done to evaluate that or to map out what's available across Northern Ireland, because I feel like there could be an inconsistency there in what's available and where it's available. What do we know about them?
Okay, so firstly, in terms of a community-based provision that's typically non-statutory, there are a couple of community-based provisions which are provided through EA, which have been procured. So we wouldn't have a full overview of what those provisions are. Where they are delivering particular projects for the department, there will be checks and balances put in place. For example, a letter of offer, there'll be Education and Training Inspectorate will review them, evaluations, but we don't have a full picture of all of those provisions across the board. Through that piece of work, the cross-cutting initiative and raise the alternative provision piece, I hope that we will get a better picture of that, but also have a better understanding of where that community provision, which is really important for a significant number of children, young people, where that sits alongside the statutory provision as well. So that is one of the questions that we'll want to answer through that research, and one of the questions that hopefully we can answer taking those couple of pilots forward in those race localities.
And to be clear, I'm confident that the ones that I've engaged with so far provide a very, very good service, and being in the community actually helps them to meet those young people at their point of need. I just think that if even as a last resort, if those services are being a substitute, if you will, for schooling, we need to be making sure that when a child drops into those services, that it's a quality enough service, and also that they are interventions that are aimed at and able to trying to get a child to the place where they're able to re-enter the schooling service or the schooling system, and if we're allowing children to drop into those services without necessarily having any sort of mapping of them or a greater understanding of them, my fear is that in some places those services may be less good than others, and actually what you see is young people dropping into them and never likely to return or to be able to better themselves in the future.
And that's one of the particular challenges, because a lot of the services you're describing are not linked to the department, they're not funded by the department, therefore we don't have oversight of them, we can't inspect them, etc., etc. So the provision that is in place by through the department on a statutory basis is has a number of boxes to tick as such. So it is a challenge, but I think it's important to say, usually when children and young people are in these community provisions, that has been a decision that their parents have taken, that has been a decision that their parents have taken. In terms of schools, there are lots of opportunities through, for example, the entitlement framework, where schools can work with, for example, training organisations, etc., to make available subjects or courses through that provision. So through the statutory framework, there's opportunities, but certainly, you're absolutely right. But given that a lot of these organisations are non-statutory, it does present challenges in terms of monitoring, I suppose, and evaluating, because they're not departmentally endorsed or departmentally funded.
Understood. I just think maybe it's something that's worth giving greater thought to in future. If they're going to become a even unofficial part of the system, what oversight is there, and we need to be careful around that. But you've brought me on to probably the second question, which is, and some of these community organisations work very well with schools, and the feedback is that some schools work better with them than others, and that's certainly my experience even in my own constituency, that there are parents whose children are dealing with these issues, and try to work with the schools to even if they're out of school for a time, to make sure they keep up and get back. Some schools, and I understand the pressures that schools are under, some schools are more helpful than others. I think it's fair to say, in terms of sending work home. There are even some schools, and I don't want to name the one that's in my own mind, that would seem to want to, once a pupil becomes problematic, quite happy to try and push them out of the school by one way or another. What direction is given from the department to schools to ensure that there is a minimum required level of support given to children when they're facing this and to their families?
So we would
As brief
certainly
an answer as possible.
absolutely. So we would certainly encourage schools as far as possible to make sure that there is access to work. You know, if a child is sick, a child is sick. You know, but if they're not in school, we would encourage them. But one of the challenges is, you know, that is not necessarily, you know, that does have implications in terms of workload. It is not something that schools must do. So certainly we would encourage, and the majority of schools do work closely with families. They do work closely with the children and young people. They work closely with their education welfare officer to try and identify, okay, is exceptional teaching arrangements appropriate? Is there a way that we can look to reintegrate that? But I suppose from a departmental perspective, we would try to encourage schools to continue to work with those families to keep those pupils engaged as much as they can. And I suppose when it comes to a point where, you know, in some of the instances where parents do decide that actually, you know, we don't want to continue with the school place, that the schools are making parents aware of the consequences of that, you know, in terms of access to examinations, in terms of access to ranges of different supports as well. So I'd encourage schools as far as possible to engage with parents and keep that I suppose that contact up, but again, you know, there's a varying picture across the board, and we do receive that feedback too.
Need to draw a line at that stage. And Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thanks, folks. I just think the first thing I want to just do quickly, I know others have raised the importance of language, and I think it's also important how we frame these conversations. So we've referenced already to be careful not to frame this as blaming parents. I think it's also probably important not to infer that this concern around attendance in school is born from the pandemic. And the pandemic is something that happened, but I think we're aware that there's problems with attendance and issues in the system that predate the pandemic, and it's just to be careful that when we're talking about this, that's not a get out of jail card for the department, and why we haven't perhaps addressed some of these issues sooner. So why are we acting now? There are a lot of other reasons. So can you just, I guess, for the completeness of the framing of this, actually outline why we're having an attendance strategy now? It's not really just a pandemic response.
Well, I think first of all, absolutely, it's not just a pandemic response, but in terms of the figures, 2017-18, 44,000 pupils had 10% or more absence, 24-25, 82,500. So that's an 87% increase. So absolutely, the pandemic, post-pandemic, there has been an impact, but you know, prior to this, we have had a range of attendance strategies. We had the Miss School Miss Out strategy. We had a range of different campaigns. This attendance strategy is a revised and refreshed attendance strategy, taking into account the context, the changing context, taking into account the emerging issues, and one of those is that emotional-based school non-attendance. That's not something that really featured back in, it featured prominently back in 2017, 2018, you know, when those figures I quoted were from. So absolutely, you know, attendance has been a challenge, and the department has been looking at attendance for a long time, but this strategy is about looking at the current context and what can we do to address some of those challenges now.
I think some of the feedback that I've got from parents on the challenges with dealing with these issues is just around the clarity of the pathways available to them, and difficulty when you're getting into dealing with different agencies outside of necessarily school, the different multi-agencies that they have to interact with, and that's very difficult for them to navigate. the strategy that you have now, can you give some assurance or explain to us how that will overcome those challenges? What will this strategy do in terms of smoothing out those clear pathways for parents to get the support they need? Often it'll be an interaction perhaps with health, so there's an emotional issue there. They have to go to somebody else to get assistance for their child, which is why they're outside of school, but they're finding it difficult to navigate those different pathways. Are you confident that what you're doing in terms of ensuring those interagency kind of interactions will be better after this strategy?
So the emotional health and wellbeing framework in education is a joint health and education framework. So that would be the starting point. Absolutely, we do have conversations with health about how we can join things up better. One of the key areas in the strategy is children missing education, and we've discussed that before, and we're working with health around how we can share data. So that multi-agency, that cross-departmental approach is really, really important, and that's something that we are looking at and we are considering, and we have been. It's not something that's just new with the attendance strategy. We work across the departments, particularly with health, on a regular basis.
No, I think it's fair to say those things are true on paper. I suppose in the real world, the experience on the ground is that those things don't happen smoothly, and the hope is that we don't produce just another piece of paper that will talk academically about how to do this better, that will actually, the parents on the ground will feel a change and feel a difference. You raised children missing in education, Claire, so it would be remiss of me not to follow up on that. Not to be glib about it at all, there was an arrest yesterday for a child, Daniel Arabu, who was murdered. Somebody was arrested for his murder. This is a child who fell through the cracks, the same with Kieran Durnan. We have the same cracks in our system here. You have a reference in your strategy on children missing in education, but I wouldn't feel confident looking at it that it's at all a priority. It says things like, subject to necessary resources being made available, that you'll collaborate on this issue. What do you mean by necessary resources, and are you giving this any priority? Because I'm not getting any confidence from that document that it is.
Absolutely. So I suppose just for just in terms of children missing education are children of compulsory school age who are registered at school but not attending, or who are not registered pupils at a school and aren't receiving a suitable education. So the legislation, as you will all know, places responsibility on the parent to find an effective education. There will be instances where a parent chooses not to register a child in school, so we don't know they are in the system. But in terms of children missing education, we have a working group that was set up in November 2024. The things that we have looked at there are existing legislation, the current duties, the obligations, the operational piece. We have mapped all of that out. We have got a draft children missing education policy, which we will put to the Minister and ask the Minister to consider. But we want to take the feedback that's coming through the attendance strategy consultation as well, to make sure there is nothing else, there's nothing else that we want to add to that. That said, there is work ongoing in the Education Authority. The Education Authority have appointed an individual who is responsible for that area within EWS. We have been working on a north-south basis and an east-west basis around the protocols. There are protocols in place, but really the work around children missing education is setting out that policy position. But I suppose just to assure you that it's not just waiting for that policy. There is already work ongoing. And there's already, there's already discussions, particularly on the back of the cases that you mentioned. We have been talking at departmental level on a north-south basis, and also with EWS around the protocols. But there are protocols, there are pieces in place.
Is there anything in particular that you're prioritising there? For example, data sharing. Will there be a data sharing agreement that might be quicker to bring forward than some of the legislative changes? For example, making sure that parents do register. I know right now they have a choice, but that's the big crack in the system, is that they drop off, they're registered with health, then it comes to education and there's no requirement there to track those kids.
It's certainly one of the areas.
Response, Claire, and then we'll have to.
Yeah, sure. It's certainly one of the areas we're looking at. It's also the joint DE, Department of Health and Department of Justice, jointly chaired the Child Protection Senior Officials Group. And it's actually one of the issues that we have on the work plan for this year as well. So we are having those discussions about the data sharing. We're having those discussions about what can we put in place. So we'll continue to work on the practical operational pieces that and to enhance and make sure that they're in place. And then the policy and the data piece should follow in due course.
Okay. that brings us to the end of that evidence session. So thank you all for your time, and we'll summarise any actions then from here. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any actions particularly arising from that? There's a fair bit probably that will carry forward to the next briefing. Is there anything in particular anyone wants to highlight that we would need to pick up at this stage? No? Agreed. We can move on to the next item then. Okay, and I'll just let the witnesses come through. And that takes us to item 7 on the agenda, and it's a briefing from the Education Authority, from the Education and Welfare Service. Witnesses aren't here yet.
No, they're outside the door.
Oh, they're just outside the door, yeah. No problem. So as the witnesses come through, I'll refer members to the briefing note from the clerk at page 99 of your packs. And then a briefing paper from the Education Authority at page 47 of your tabled papers. And you'll be aware also, as was discussed before the last briefing, we have the Independent Autism Reviewer correspondence there to factor into this conversation as well. So just while everybody gets seated, I'll run through who we'll be hearing from today. We have Eve Bremner, just arriving, Chief Education Officer with the EA. Is Una joining us today? Yeah, Una Turbot, yeah. Everyone just, it's all been staggered, that's fine. Assistant Director of Children and Young People Services at the EA, and Thomas Adele, Chief Transformation Officer within the EA. So I think it had been referenced just earlier in the meeting, some correspondence that had landed around youth services, and I think Thomas, you'd said you would make yourself available to speak about that. We will see how the timing goes. I think there's a lot of interest in this subject matter, and time may beat us on that, but we do have some written correspondence in with yourselves on the youth services element, so we'll see how that session goes. So thank you all for your attendance. You're very welcome here, and Eve, your first committee attendance in this role, so you're very welcome this afternoon. So I'll hand over for any initial presentation, up to 10 minutes, and then we will move into question and answer. And I'll just flag, probably more for members than anybody else, we'll be sticking more rigidly to timings today, because we are now up against it on the clock. I think everybody was pushing it a bit on times there, myself included, so we'll be a little bit stricter on that, but I'll hand over to yourselves at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Members of the committee, if you don't mind, I'm going to make a couple of opening remarks, and I don't think I will need 10 minutes. You've got a detailed written briefing and would like to give time for questions, but there are a number of points that we thought would be helpful just to focus on and give you a bit of information on at the beginning. And what I would say is really at the heart of the briefing we provided you in advance, and what we'll speak about today is a really simple but fundamental message, and that's that every child and young person has the right to an education that enables them to thrive, and fundamentally that parents hold the primary responsibility for ensuring their child accesses that education. That being said, there's a collective role in terms of supporting that, and our specific role within the EA is to work with families to help them and support them in fulfilling that responsibility, and to work with our schools, who play a hugely important role as well, and others, ultimately to support parents where there are challenges with attendance. And also to say that only in the most exceptional circumstances, after all reasonable efforts have been exhausted, do we even consider pursuing formal action where we are concerned that a child's access to education remains at risk. The legal framework as it stands is clear. Under the Education and Libraries Order of 1986, parents must ensure their child receives an efficient and full-time education that's suitable to their age, ability, aptitude and any special educational needs. They're also responsible for securing their child's regular attendance, and within the legislation there are responsibilities of us in terms of the approach that we take and any requirement in terms of prosecutions. The duty, as it were, applies equally to all parents, and it exists fundamentally to protect all children. And so, it is troubling that there might be a suggestion that children with special educational needs should not be afforded the same protection. With that in mind, our approach is centred on the welfare of the child. Our Education and Welfare Service supports over 1,100 schools, so all schools, and works every day with families facing a wide range of challenges. And we receive, and I can speak more to this, but we receive about 3,000 referrals to that service in any given year. The starting point, I have to say, for that service is always about engagement with the family, with the schools, with the pupil. It's about understanding their circumstances and about early intervention, because fundamentally we want to have children in school. That's what's at heart here and what we're trying to achieve. Our education and welfare officers take a rights-based and a graduated approach. They will visit homes, they will mediate between families and schools, they will advocate for parents and pupils, and they'll coordinate with multi-agency and multidisciplinary partners. And I suppose I would, at this point, just like to pay tribute and convey my thanks and appreciation to the team of officers for the work that they do. Where children have special educational needs and we are concerned about attendance, we do recognise that there are obviously different and potentially additional pressures that families may face. We work really closely with parents, schools, educational psychologists, SENCOs, or health and social care colleagues in those cases to identify what are the right strategies. And as with all pupils, that can include a reconsideration of their current placement. The needs of the child are paramount, and when attendance difficulties arise, we consider the full context, the professional advice available to us, and any mitigating factors before taking further steps. And thankfully, the vast majority, I have to say, of attendance concerns that are referred to us are improved and resolved through this approach without any need for any legal or formal action. And so I want to be clear, prosecution is a last resort. It is used only when all other avenues have been exhausted, when engagement with parents has repeatedly failed or been refused, and when a child's education, we consider, remains at risk. And I would also say that we remain committed to even having initiated those cases, as it were. If we see an improvement and we can work with families, fundamentally that's the most important thing, and we will not pursue legal action if we don't believe it will have a positive outcome. It's a measure, I have to say, directed at parental responsibility. It's not directed at the child, and it's subject to a rigorous internal decision-making process. We have internal court proceedings panels, and they will look at each case individually in detail. We'll consider welfare considerations, the parental cooperation, the evidence they may provide us in terms of their statutory defences, and the potential for alternatives. The number of prosecutions, as you'll know, has therefore reduced significantly in recent years and reflects, we believe, the effectiveness of that graduated trauma-informed approach. We also recognise that parents choose to withdraw their child from school or choose to electively home educate. That's a lawful choice, and we respect that right. But I would say we don't believe it's the only alternative available in those circumstances. As I said, we're committed to supporting children to attend school, and we will work with families to explore adjusted timetables, additional support, changes of placement or alternative placement and provision, and other tailored solution. Our aim is always to find a pathway that meets the child's needs and supports regular attendance and supports parents in their legal and moral responsibilities. The briefing today and provided in advance provides greater detail to this work, and I trust provides an insight and assurance of our approach. But that's not to say we don't recognise that there can't and shouldn't be room for improvement. We're committed to that. Some of the examples of that are already underway include we've launched a regional practice audit of our prosecution cases. That's to ensure that the processes that we use are robust, consistent and aligned with good practice. We've also significantly advanced the transformation of our EWS service and its structure, and it's allowed us, for example, to recruit some specialised education and welfare officers, and we've already modernised the referral system to us from schools, and that allows us to strengthen early intervention, track the progress of cases and reduce waiting times. So, Chair, members, the EA's commitment is unwavering to act in the best interest of every child and young person and to support parents in their central role and to uphold the right to education fairly and consistently. We welcome, I have to say, the scrutiny. We are committed, if there are things we need to do better, to doing that. And I'm very happy to discuss this further and take any questions.
Thank you. And I think probably just from my perspective, a couple of things I would want to just sort of comment at the outset. I mean, and I think it's been a theme probably of every member's contribution, even in the previous session, that there is an acceptance that children attending school is absolutely a fundamental right, and it is something that we should all be doing our absolute level best to ensure that every child does access an appropriate place and then attends that place, absolutely. But I suppose to just reference your closing remarks, we understand prosecutions are, it's relatively low numbers, that it is a last resort, but that given the severity of the impact that can have on the individuals involved, it does warrant scrutiny. And I think that there has been a degree of public interest in the matter, but I think it's important to set out at the outset we're here to discuss the general principles around the service, and how that particular element of it functions. And I think there may well be wider questions beyond prosecution. I know that's been the sort of the initial contact, but I think that there will be interest in the service and feeding on from some of the issues we discussed with the department previously. So look, I'll just with that sort of said, I'll pick up with a question really, I suppose, around how the service's effectiveness is monitored. So in terms of if the outcomes are about what's good for the child, so what's the data like that the EA holds in terms of when you go through that process? What does attendance look like on the other side of that? How is the child then supported after that, the family supported, and also the educational outcomes for that child on the other side of a prosecution? So what sort of data do you hold on that?
And Chair, just so I'm clear, you're asking about that just in relation to the small number of prosecutions as opposed to the general intervention?
Yes, so it's really to help me understand, well, I suppose if the purpose of a prosecution is to do something that's in the best interest of the child, I assume to get them attending school, what's the data like? I would just be keen to understand on what happens on the other side of that.
So I'll maybe say a couple of opening remarks, and then I know you'll want to come in. Data is, I think it'd be fair to say can be challenging for us. A bit of insight I would give you though in terms of, I think we'd relayed to you that there were about 70, we received about 3,000 referrals, in a year. About 70 of those in the last 12 months initiated, as it were, got to the point where we felt legal action should be pursued. Now, if I look at that 70, of that, about a third of those as a result of that action initiating, because we were able then to engage more formidably, I have to say, with parents, the attendance improved, and so we were able to effectively withdraw those cases because the outcome that we'd received was what we wanted. About a third of the cases proceeded to court, and ultimately it's the court's determination, but in a third of those cases they determined that the parent ultimately had committed an offence, and about a third are still have not been concluded yet. So that gives you a bit of insight in terms of even the cases. If you look at about it in the last 12 months,
over time, in terms of the data, we established this is a system that's been in place for a long time.
Yes.
So what's the data like in terms of when you prosecute a parent? What's the outcome on the other side for the child?
I think it's fair to say that our data needs to improve generally in relation to the educational welfare service, which is one of the reasons why we are engaged in the transformation programme. It's not where we need it to be. We definitely need one of the enablers to be put in place, which is to digitise the service, and that includes caseload work. We are working through...
just because time is against us, what I'm interested in is, do you have data when you prosecute a parent? What happens to the attendance rate of that child, and what are their educational outcomes on the other side to that as compared to before that intervention? This is a serious intervention, so I'm trying to establish what's the impact of it.
The data would be held at the team leader level, and I think it's fair to say we don't have regional data that we publish in relation to that, and that is something that we should do and will do as part of the transformation programme.
Can I make it very clear? I think that is essential if we want to build confidence that this is an undertaking that we're content to put public money into, content to go through criminal proceedings, that we need to know that there's something on the other side of that we can stand over and say that's the outcome. And it's a positive one for the child.
I think you're right, and I accept that in terms of some of our performance, management has become very focused on kind of output, if that makes sense, as opposed to needing the reassurance around the outcome. I would say that there is another kind of lens in which to look at that through, and that's fundamentally that the legislation requires the prosecution. And if there's a view that, as a legislator or political representatives, that's not an appropriate remedy, then that sits fundamentally as a legislative. As it stands, our responsibility is to operationalise it.
Now, the department work, they don't seem to have any intention of looking at that. Can I ask in terms of, a service then, would you be suggesting there are times that perhaps if you're taking a best interest of the child approach, can the legislation act in conflict with that? The imperative to prosecute, can that act in conflict with the case that's in front of you?
I mean, I'm uncomfortable with us straying into that territory because, I mean, fundamentally, there has to be clear water between the department and yourselves in terms of what's legislation and policy. But what I would want to reassure you on, and that's again not to say that there are things that we need to get better about or be more transparent about, I would want to reassure you that best interest of the child influences and shapes how we operationalise it, if that makes sense. So,
can I be very clear in terms of my interactions with educational welfare officers at local level and in parents' feedback? Often very, very positive, and in terms of actually a wish that engaged sooner with us, or not yes. Don't say the wish we had engaged in, whatever the phrase might be, that it's a positive interaction. So there's nothing in what I'm saying here to say that anybody operating within those teams is doing anything other than thinking about best interests of children, but it's whether the system is driving interactions or actions on cases that we might otherwise maybe think that there could be a better way to do this, is what I'm trying to establish.
I think in terms of legislation, the children order legislation takes precedent. Yes, we have a balance between the human rights legislation and parental rights and that, but I suppose our primary legislation is the children order legislation and the need to protect our children. We have over 2,000 children on our child protection register right now, over 22,000 children who are in need of social services intervention, and of those child protection referrals that have gone through, 16% of them are coming from schools and educational welfare officers. That's really important because we have a duty to protect children. It's everybody's responsibility, not just the educational welfare officers. The one thing I would point you to is the children order regulations. Now, the regulations actually tell us that where parents are not cooperating, then it is unlikely that we are going to make progress. And that's coming from the Department of Health regulations. So that guides our principles. So are we in variance to the legislation? I don't think so. I think it underpins our practice.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to push you too far in terms of your assessment of the legislative framework, because you're ultimately not responsible for it. I suppose I'll just finish on prosecutions with it's a significant intervention, and I would just like to be reassured that we do have data about what the impact for the child is on the other side. So that would be it. And I'll ask just one other question on that, and it's around oversight and whether or not you think it would be beneficial to have some other form of oversight to build public confidence. And I'm thinking Criminal Justice Inspectorate. Is there something else that, because at the minute, and again, and I want to choose language really carefully, I'm not trying to suggest that anybody's trying to conceal, but just that the process it's very much an internalised EA process. Is there a need to get some structures of oversight over that to build public confidence?
I mean, we discussed this, in preparations, both of anticipation of that question today. It's not there, obviously, in terms of the legislative framework, but we would certainly welcome it. If fundamentally scrutiny brings about better practice, better outcomes, we welcome it.
And they go for everything we do. We like being scrutinised because that's the only way we can improve.
No, that's fine. I'll bring the Deputy Chair, and then if other members want to indicate.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, can you clarify the qualification requirements for an education welfare officer? Do they have to be a qualified social worker, or what is the minimum requirement?
I'm going to defer to you.
Okay. Currently it is, we recruit social workers for the grade of educational welfare officer. Previously it may have been a teacher or a youth worker, so we do have a couple of teachers and youth workers who have remained in our service. But all of our educational welfare officers are registered with the Northern Ireland Social Care Council.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, given that many of the attendance issues that are being dealt with are fairly complex social or mental health issues, and I'm just wondering, some of the category of people you have mentioned, would they have the necessary skills to deal with some of those complex problems?
They're a very experienced staff, and collectively with the 124, I think they do share best practice. Now, that said, as part of the transformation programme, that's why we were keen to bring in specialists specialist posts, and they don't have to be social work qualified. So they could come from mental health background, for example. We have one, I think, coming from a public health background, youth justice background. So what we've tried to do through the transformation programme is to bring a breadth of knowledge into the service. And we do that, I suppose the service, the Educational Welfare Service, doesn't work in isolation. It's working very closely with our Educational Psychology Service, with the Wellbeing Service, and with others, so it doesn't sit in isolation. And the other services I think that we're really dependent on are our community voluntary sector colleagues, because we work very closely through the family support hubs and through the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, for example, to best understand and meet the needs of children and young people. So I suppose the message I'm saying is no service in isolation will meet the needs of our children. We have to collaborate, and our partnership approach is really what drives us, and certainly is part of our transformational agenda.
And then I suppose in terms of the deployment of these officers, how does that work? Are they allocated to a school or a certain number of pupils, or how does it work?
Yeah, as part of the transformation programme, we looked at the structure, both the practice structure, the administration structure and the management structure. So we've aligned ourselves along the Health and Social Care Trust alignment. So we have 5 teams, and the rationale behind that is because we work so closely with social services and others, that it makes partnership development and relationships easier. So for example, we will have a team who will work with schools in the Belfast Trust area. We'll have another one with the South Eastern Trust, Western Trust, and so on. And they work as part of a team, so they're not. They can't. We cannot say, there's 3 EWOs and they're going to work in a particular area. We need to look at where the demand is, where the need is.
Okay. And you're coming on to my next question, okay. Because clearly there's a relationship between disadvantage and lower school attendances, and therefore are the officers being deployed where they're most needed? Is it on the basis of objective need rather than just, there's, let's say for argument's sake, 25 in the Belfast Trust, 25 in the Southern Trust, or whatever the number is?
Happy for me to continue. There's a triage process put in place. So when referrals come through, when those 3,000 referrals come in, they are scrutinised by the now called assistant heads of service and their team leaders, and they're allocated accordingly. So there is a prioritisation there. But we also have other data. For example, the deprivation indices, and we also know where the schools are with the poorest attendance or where they're having challenges, so that we can target interventions at those particular schools. Now, I have to say, we're still in early days. We had Action Short of Strike for 2 years, so this transformation programme is in year 1, but the direction of travel, I think, is the right one.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Cathy, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Eve, in your opening presentation, you mentioned quite a few times about the duty on parents. I just want to ask, from their perspective, what about those parents who manage to get their children into the car, if they can manage to get their children into the car, who are physically hurting themselves, hurting others, being physically sick, because they just cannot, their anxiety will just not allow them to be in school? What about those parents?
Put it at its simplest, Cathy, those are not the parents who you proceed a prosecution with. Fundamentally, that is a parent who we want to support, and I know from personal experience, that is a really, really difficult situation to be in. So I have to say, we are so committed to working with a parent, understanding the circumstances, and if we can support them, and if the school can support that child to get in, that is fundamentally what we want to do.
And I appreciate that, and I wasn't trying to say that to... the reason I was trying to say that is the importance of language, because those parents out there very often feel that they're being blamed. They very often feel that, rather than this being treated as a child's response to their anxiety, their circumstances, to their trauma, it's being treated as a behavioural issue or something along those lines. I appreciate you saying that you're committed to supporting those parents. That's not always the case, and those parents don't always feel that way. And I suppose if we are frank and honest about it, there are many children out there who are in places that are not meeting their needs. Would you agree with that is creating or adding to this problem, that schools cannot and are not able to meet the needs of some of these children, and that's adding to this?
Well, I suppose first of all, what I would say is if there are parents out there, or you're finding parents who don't feel that is their experience with us, I would want to know, if that makes sense, because that is what we want to achieve. We want a parent to feel supported, and we want the school to feel supported in terms of working them first and foremost. So if we haven't got that right, and I would want to know. So I'm not trying to overlay that with the great work that is done. It's just if there's things we need to do better, we could. In terms of placements, and I presume you're particularly talking about children who are placed, as it were, in terms of having a statement of special educational need. I sort of don't want to steal your space in terms of speaking about it. But again, it's back to the point of we don't look, this is not a pure, a child is not attending, therefore we jump to a process of prosecution. If a child is not attending and a school, a parent has, not been able to address it, if the school feels that they need additional support, and all those things will have happened first, then it's about coming to us to say what more or what can we do differently to support that child, and that's accepting that there may be limitations, and part of that will include looking at their placement and the support that they get and the suitability of that. Do you want to?
I mean, the very same thing on support for children with a statement of SEN or SEN in wider SEN. Do we have a support offer that meets the needs of the children as well as it could? The simple answer is no. I mean, and I've said it every time I've been here, we need to transform the support delivered to children with statement of SEN. That includes the whole spectrum. That will help with attendance, that will help with the child feeling or finding it easier to attend school. There's no discussion about that. That's a big piece of work we're talking about next week, I think, because that's absolutely, we're the first one to admit that we're not doing as good as we could do. We can improve massively.
And just in terms of those supports, so exceptional teaching arrangements, what I'm hearing is that it's potluck on whether your child can access them or not access them, and it varies from school to school. It varies within schools. Some teachers are happy to give work home, other teachers can't or won't or whatever that may be. And I've heard that some children, in some instances, stage 2 CAMs are being accepted, and in some instances they're not. Where is the line here, or how is this being allocated?
You're referring about our ETA service, and I'm going to bring in, because I suppose there's a difference between some of the measures that a school would take to try and facilitate a child's continued learning versus, I suppose, moving to potentially an alternative or a short-term placement with our ETA or EOTAS. So you're,
these are big areas, but I'm asking you to try and answer briefly, and I know that's difficult.
It is. I suppose I take your point. The level of children's anxiety and the number of children that are experiencing anxiety is escalating, and the reason why we know that, I suppose, from the Hope Counselling contract, for example, that is available to all our post-primary children, we are able to get data from that, and very useful data. Anxiety is the top reason why our children attend the Hope Counselling service, and we have in 1 year over 40,000 counselling sessions provided to post-primary children. Family dynamics is the second one. What's happening at the home is another one. Anger, bereavement, behaviour. There's a range of issues, but the emotional well-being of our children, and I probably, in terms, we do put it under the umbrella of emotionally based school avoidance. There's so many reasons why children are avoiding school and unable to attend school and being anxious. Our job is not necessarily to go in with one fix. We need to understand that from the child's point of view. We need to understand what is making them anxious, how do we understand it, how do we support parents to better understand it, and work together in order to encourage the child to go back, to be able to attend school for even part of the time, and then build that up. So that's what we're trying to do. The Being Well, Doing Well programme is a whole school approach that we are taking to improving or trying to support our pastoral care teachers and the schools to deal with this issue. It's difficult, and then we are also working at another level with schools who are coming onto our programme to enhance their understanding of trauma-informed practice and all of that. I appreciate
well,
we're under time.
asking
But I think what we are saying is,
Gina.
I would say to any parent, I think as Eve has said, you know, if you're in this situation, work with us. Come to us, ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We're not going to take you to court. If you're prepared to work with us, we want to take a trauma-informed approach to this. We want to get you the right service. It might be the educational welfare service. It might be another service completely. But you know, talk to us and talk to your pastoral carer. Talk to your school.
I know I'm still not clear on the exceptional teaching arrangements.
Okay.
Yeah.
ETA, exceptional teaching. You've probably you've mixed maybe two things up with respect. The first one is what schools do. So schools, if a child is registered with them, are encouraged to send work home to a child who is still registered with their school. Exceptional
that's not always happening, and that's the case. It's kind of potluck, and schools understandably are under pressure, and teachers are under pressure. So it's what should they do? What's the guidance that schools should have? What support do schools get to do this? Because, like I say, it is potluck at the minute.
I think that is something.
That's something that will pick up, and along with other management authorities and sectoral bodies as well.
And I think possibly in terms of actions at the end of the session, I think maybe something to follow up in detail in writing on that, because I think we all hear that from parents coming through. Okay.
The education authorities ETA is for children with medical needs. It should be short term, and it's 4.5 hours per week maximum. So it's not an alternative to school. It's a support whilst the child is sick or ill, and that includes mental health issues. Unfortunately, can be prolonged, but that's a different service.
John, you'd indicated next.
Yes, thank you. That was really useful. Prosecution. You state repeatedly that prosecution is a last resort. Now, I was asking the preceding witnesses about some concerns I have just about how objective decision making is and transparent. I want to couch it, I'm not anti-prosecution. Where it's correct, we should be doing that, because parents clearly have a legal, ethical, and moral duty. And there's real safeguarding risks if we're not actually making sure children are in school and their future. But just explain to me the definition of last resort. Is that set out in one transparent guidance with objective factors?
So again, when you start to look at your service, as it were, through the lens of new chief officers and through the lens of transformation, that for me is a gap in terms of I'm assured that we are doing that work and we are applying those processes, even if it isn't legislatively required of us. But I don't think that we have captured that somewhere that is transparent. If you would allow us, what I would like Una to do is articulate what we do, and then one of the commitments I would give you from here is that we will. Well, we'll assure ourselves that that is appropriate, but we'll also capture that in a single either procedure or policy, and we'll need to work with the department in terms of that. But I think we all set ourselves the commitment we'd like to have that in place for the new academic year.
So you're new, but the organisation isn't, and prosecutions are not.
No.
The Butler Act goes back to what, 1944?
Yeah.
It's 2026.
Yeah, and 86
You're telling
for
me
this
we're going to get the
particular.
document now that says objectively what a last resort is?
Well, what I would say is it hasn't ever been asked of us, not that that's an excuse, but what we have done is put in place procedures internally that do make sure that that rigour is there, and given that we have those procedures, I think what we do need to do is make sure that those are transparent and public and provide that reassurance to parents. So I can only give you the commitment from the point that I've stepped in the chair. That does not mean to say that that work wasn't and hasn't been taking place over many years.
Power that you have akin to the PPS we saw with the post office scandal, that whenever you actually have basically the investigatory power and the prosecutorial power, you are judge and jury. The only thing you're leaving is to the execution. Of course, it's not an execution, but you still own two of the three big parts of the justice system when it comes to this piece of work. Much more powerful than the police and PPS, because you're actually really investigating the matter.
Well, we're certainly not the judge. What's
Well, you're
asked
not the
of us
judge,
is-
but you're doing the two before then, in
We
the
have to
sense
do
that
it-
you're the prosecution.
Yeah, and ultimately we have to determine if a case is taken forward, and then it is for
I'm
the
asking
courts.
what objective factors do you use for that?
And that's what if you can, I will allow Una to come in. There's details in your briefing, but I do accept that that's not captured in a single document that is articulated somewhere, and it's something I'm committed to do.
Okay. I suppose what the service would say in terms of last resort is we will not go to court if a parent is working with us and we can see that there's opportunities to make progress. That's how the service would define it. Now, we don't work on our own. As I said, we work in partnership, so we have a duty to consult social services. So if we're going to court or considering going to court, we will talk to our social work colleagues in the trusts. We also work with schools. So before we will progress down this line, there must have been an education planning meeting, and that planning meeting is where a meeting is held in the school. The parents are invited to attend that meeting. Anybody that's involved in that situation will sit down and discuss the case, and hopefully through that in itself try to find a pathway to make progress. That's the starting point. If that doesn't work, then it will go to court proceedings panels that's held in each of the five teams, and that's chaired by a senior officer within EA. They will look for evidence, and it will be the attendance. How much, what's the school attendance been like? What efforts have been made in order to improve the attendance? What's the level of progress? What is the parental response to it? And what's the parental capacity in order to make change? And that can be difficult when parents are suffering themselves from mental health issues or domestic violence or addictions or other things. And the views of the school and the parents and the young person, age appropriately, will be taken into consideration. So we look at the evidence, we look at the stage of casework, we look at the expressed concerns, and we look also at the statutory defences. They are required to look at the statutory defences and decide whether or not one of those applies. We also then look at the level, and I think when it talks about last resort, one of the key things for us here is the extent of the parental engagement with the service. So it is about have we initiated an action plan that the parent has agreed to? Have they been able to adhere to it? If not, why not? What do we need to do about it? And can we do something differently? We look at medical advice, medical information coming through. We look for reasonable efforts.
There is an issue of time. I get that. In terms of the consistency of that, I mean, there's different people involved in this decision making, and then people change rules. How do we make sure it's consistent if there's not a written down objective factors that you...
That's all recorded. So each child is considered separately at the panel. There's a record kept of that, and it's kept in, then it's recorded in the child's file. I think we're trying to balance. There is a balance to be had here in delay. So you could equally be, I suppose, challenged in the service in creating delay because we are being as rigorous as we are, and we know that every day that the child is out of school is having a negative impact. So, if you look to some of the work that has been done on the impact of a child not receiving their education on their short-term and long-term health outcomes.
Here I'm sold, and I would like to see potentially more prosecutions if they're
just final comment.
Yeah, just final.
On the interest of time.
It's making sure that they're right and they're fair.
Yeah, I agree.
And look, it's a major issue if parents aren't doing it deliberately,
Absolutely.
exercising parental responsibility. It's a form of neglect. And there is some cases, I know some politicians don't like to address it, but there are some parents who do neglect their children.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I've seen it. Just so one final question. The court panels consider
We're going to have time for a full answer, but if you want to put it on the record, and we can follow it up in writing if we need to.
Just read the pack. Your court panels consider the extent and quality of parental cooperation, but the data looks at EA interventions as opposed to parental behaviour. What?
Look, in terms of, we'd need to go back into the records, which is why we're carrying out an audit, a practice audit. And what we've asked the auditor to do is to actually look for hard evidence in relation to the engagement with parents. What was the level of change that they were being asked to? We need to empower them as well, and are they willing to work with us? So that's the purpose of having the audit, so that we can be much more definitive from our experience over the last year as to what are the factors that have demonstrated that parents are cooperating and what are the factors that are demonstrating that they're not. And we use that information then, and we'll share that audit report with you so that we can...
Good, just my final observation is all of this should be transparent and published.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
No,
I
parents know the benchmark and the yardsticks, and it's consistently and fairly enforced. And that actually might create a better deterrent.
No, I think that's
I have to draw a line there, John.
Thanks.
Okay, Danny, you were next. I'm just going to emphasise the members, a lot of questions coming in, and then a big final ticket questions coming in. As I'm about to say, that's your time up. So we really do need to be, if you've got really big issues you want to get raised, just get to them quickly so that we can hear the evidence on it. Danny, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Pastoral care is going to be really important to deal with the low attendance that we're seeing across our schools. Healthy, Happy Minds, the Engage programme, EOTA centres, really important. They were successful, they are successful, right? But we're not funding them programmes anymore, and referrals to the EOTA centres, the community and voluntary, is going to stop in June. No, there's no.
Well, so I'll take 2 points. I suppose the funding decisions you'll appreciate don't sit with the EA.
But they were successful though, weren't they? They were both in programmes, very successful.
As I understand, they were hugely well received. Yeah. But it's not my bailiwick, as it were, to comment on funding decisions. What I would say, just to be very clear in terms of EOTAS, it is not the case that we have made a decision to cease referrals to the community voluntary sector in June. We at the moment operate a hybrid model of both some EA provided services and community voluntary sector. And so we
have I picked up it wrong, the statement when
yes, sorry.
We have
yes. What
so
we
when
have
the statement
done
was about the school meals going up, home to transport. Why was the EOTA centres mentioned?
Okay, so we temporarily paused our referrals for the remainder of this academic year. And that really was down, that's not an easy decision to make. It was only done with an assurance that we could still meet the need, as it were, through our existing provision. We know that was very difficult for those providers, and Una and our team have been out and spoken with them, but it is not on the presumption that does not play a part in our provision moving forward.
Sorry, so I'll just go, I'm going to be procurative here, I'm sorry. So the Lagan Valley one up based in Poglass, the last I spoke to them was quite recently, and they told me that they won't be getting any referrals come June. Has that changed?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, we have a procurement exercise. So what is, as Eve said, we had a savings plan. We paused the referrals to the 3 community provisions. We only have 3 community provisions in the Belfast area, so that's the level of blended model that we have. We now need to go through. The intention is that those services will be required next year. We will need
suspended their
we
referrals.
paused the referrals.
We're playing a bit with words here.
No, we're not.
Sorry, there's two separate, but I think conflated issues here. There is the decision because of the budget to pause in-year referrals. What happens beyond June was always going to be subject to a new contractual process, because this is contract provision. That contract was coming to an end in June, and we need to put in place new contractual arrangements now. So technically, can they say they don't have referrals beyond June? To some extent, that's accurate in that their contract runs to June, but at no point have we made a presumption, as it were, that would not be the case beyond that. But we do, A, need a budget, 2, need to go through, we always would have been going through a new contractual process.
Technically, I'm right in saying there's a danger, though, that their doors could shut come June.
I don't think it's fair to either speculate that, or that I would necessarily want to put that out there. It's not the message we've given. To be fair, I won't go down that, but it was put in the statement. It was the EA put in the statement about referrals to the EOTA centres. Paused.
Okay, playing with words here, pausing,
no, I just
suspending.
Want to be very clear in our language and what we are doing and what we're not doing.
Okay, well, okay. Is it fair to say then all the same schools then are doing all the heavy lifting?
In respect of, sorry, Danny.
The reason why I'm asking, so children with additional needs. So I said this in the earlier evidence, we're talking about attendance. There are schools that if you did not include SPIMS, their attendance could be as high as 96%, but when you include children of SPIMS, drops it down to 90 or just below the 90, which is huge. I was surprised that wasn't coming up in their own presentations, and that's not being spoke about enough. So that tells me anecdotally that there's a serious issue then with children not being placed properly, if the attendance of those children is having that weight of an impact on the whole overall school attendance. And that means then the same schools are doing all the heavy lifting, and what support is then going into them school leaders.
So I think a couple of things that I think it's important to note that not a child not attending a SPIM doesn't mean that the placement is inappropriate. It might mean there are some men of Australia very complex children have very complex issues, and we need to work with them. So that's right. In some, I want to finish because I want to put my hands up as well, saying that we also do not provide the best available support package for children with statement of SEN, whether in SPIM or in mainstream. Right. So that our support model is not the optimal model to provide the best support. If we had a better support model, which we'll talk about more next week, we will be able to support children in SPIMs better than we are now. I mean, I put my hand up saying that we're not best. When it comes to heavy lifting, yes, we know that the pressures, so SEN prevalence or SEN children with SEN are higher in socially deprived areas. School absence is higher in socially deprived areas. So yes, it's absolutely fair to say that those principals in those schools are under more pressure, of course.
Yeah, because them schools and them school leaders are the ones who are doing the heavy lifting.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you.
They're opening their doors and other schools, and does that picking on grammar schools, and I guess because this is happening in primary schools as well in more affluent areas, that children are then being taxied in or going doing long distance.
Time is going to
be
just
funny. So it's an RWE issue on this here.
If
it travels wrong, then that child mightn't go to school, and I think this has been completely missed in everything that we're doing.
So I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but one thing I want to say is that many of these schools who have SPIMs and good big SEN populations are because they're very good at helping those children, right? They have a culture which allows them to do more, right? Easy. And that's not saying that other schools aren't good at it, but they don't have the experience and they don't have the history of doing that. That causes some challenges.
Maybe they're just not putting their head above the parapet while others are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go quite that far, but we know there are challenges, but we need to provide a better and more appropriate support package for school leaders, for teachers as well. I'm the first to agree with that.
I'll have to draw a line and we'll maybe revisit next week. Michelle, you were next there.
Thanks, folks. Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground already, and there's so many different things to ask you guys when you're here. I think the first thing I want to do is we've talked a lot about attendance, the reasons for attendance, we've gone into prosecutions. I just have to note that I got an email today from a parent whose child is not attending, and it absolutely floored me. Their experience, how horrendous it is for the child, how horrendous it is for the parent. They had to come out of work, and they've other examples of parents who are having to leave their work as well to kind of manage their child. So these are really, really difficult and challenging situations, I think, in particular in the context of talking about prosecutions. We can't lose sight that what we're talking about here is actually really complex and really sensitive for a lot of the families. That parent had one question they asked me to ask you, so I'll ask you. It might be slightly out of kilter from what we're talking about, but she was just very concerned about the pathways and not having any clarity really once they've been referred into to get an educational welfare officer. They've been waiting since September and nobody has contacted them since September. I know there's waiting lists and there's pressure, but can you give some hope that this is going to improve for parents like that? And what does that parent do now to get their child the help that they need?
I'm going to say a couple of things, and then I know you'll want to speak to it. The level, the volume. We know system-wide attendance issues have risen, and we know that post-COVID, and we also know that we're not out of kilter with other areas in terms of that. It is a problem that we have. I and we fundamentally accept that there are parents out there who would love nothing more than that their child went into school happy and attended every day, but we know that's not the reality for some of them. I would love to say that we have the capacity to address the level of demand and growing demand that I think we're seeing across the system. I don't think I could sit here and say that we necessarily have the level of capacity to meet the expectations or need that there necessarily is. But what I would say is that there's a huge amount of work has gone on within the service to make sure that we are triaging cases, if that makes sense. And some of that work will be, that we look to the school to provide the type of support that Cathy was talking about beforehand. Sorry, I was distracted by sidebars. And then I think in terms of the education, one, let us know the individual case and we'll look at it. But that educational welfare officer will be able to speak to that parent about the options open to them in the current situation with the school and provide support. They will want to work with that parent.
Yeah.
in
It's not happening for them at the minute. You know, it isn't. And I guess then I would want maybe just move on then to, we've talked about prosecutions and the level. And I guess in that context where everything is so stretched on the ground, dealing with the actual pressures of these families and these children, how much are you spending? What's the resources going into prosecutions? And like what's, you said it's a small amount, but like how much is that? What is
I don't have that information, but happy to get it and revert to you. I suppose that if I may, I am going to lay a bit of a challenge back. I mean, fundamentally, if as a society or culturally we don't want to prosecute for this, and you tell us not to prosecute, you know, it's our job to operationalise the legislation.
Just to be clear, I haven't said that.
No, but I'm just saying...
just when you're responding to me, I have not said there should be no prosecutions. I just want to make that really clear.
But in terms of a decision about, you know, how much we spend on it and whether we do, to some extent that's taken out of our hands.
It's an obvious question though today, that what you're spending on it. I think I would have expected perhaps that you would know how much you're spending on prosecutions when we're talking about a session here on prosecutions. I don't think that's it.
No, I'm not saying it's unreasonable. It's just something that we're going to have to go away and calculate. It's not necessarily something that, you know, I own a report on, but sorry.
Do you want to give you some indication? Basically, and the spend is within our core service. So whilst we're doing work on prosecutions, whilst we're having these court panels, that's taken us away from the work that maybe we would like to be doing, which is the preventative and early intervention work, which we know works. So in terms of financial investment, there is no additional financial investment or budget around the court panels. It comes from our core business. So it's time. It's the time of the seniors, it's the time of the staff member to write a report, come and present it. It's the time of others to come and listen to it and to make that decision-making process. So it's time resource.
You mentioned the audit, the regional practice audit. Who's carrying that out for you?
That's been carried out by a member of our Child Protection Support Service, so it's not a member of the Educational Welfare Service. So it's somebody who's knowledge of it, who understands it.
They'd be independent of it?
They're independent of the service, but they are an employee of EA. And I absolutely can give you assurance. Our Child Protection Support Service is an excellent service. They are very highly experienced and very credible, and schools are, you know, constantly commending them. I'm very confident in the person that has agreed to do this this work. We have terms of reference. It's very clear, and I think we will learn from this audit.
Question's not a big one of time.
Yeah, it would be just a brief final question and brief response, and we'll move on.
Looking at the terms of reference of it, and you're looking at compliance with existing legislation, will you be looking at the appropriateness of some of that legislation? I know it's been brought out here in terms of the defences available, that those perhaps aren't suitable in 2026 for the reasons that parents perhaps aren't not letting their kids go to school, but children aren't attending school is a lot more complexity than some of the reasons that there are there at the moment.
Yeah, I think what we will always do in terms is engage with our departmental colleagues to say if we see that there's a consequence or impact of legislation on the operationalisation. So yes, I would hope if that was going to be reviewed, we'd have the opportunity to shape and feedback. You know, it really isn't for us to determine, for example, if prosecution is something that societally we want or not, but we would certainly want to shape and guide that.
I think I'll just make a comment at this stage, and I think I sort of prefaced the session with some remarks in this space. I think prosecutions, for whatever reason, maybe haven't had a lot of public scrutiny before, and I know Eve, you'd set out, you know, if this isn't what we want, you know, then it's basically over to us as legislators. I suppose for us to understand if it is something that we think is worthwhile doing, or the way that we're doing it is the right way, we have to have these conversations. You know, so we can't be expected to form a view unless we know what's the impact of the service, how much does it cost, what's the objective criteria applied in making these decisions. Those to me feel like appropriate questions to help legislators reach a view on how we feel about this service, and then there's a wider societal question around that. So, you know, there are definitely bigger questions, you know, around all of this, but I think I would want to maybe echo Michelle's comments. I don't think anybody said fundamentally we don't support prosecutions. I mean, I'm Pat likes to use the phrase agnostic on certain policy issues. I'm agnostic, but I do firmly believe children should be in school, and we should be doing everything we should to ensure that right is being appropriately given to all children. So.
Just say one thing. One, I think all of the anxiety-related stuff. I do think phones are a big issue that we should need to deal with. But second of all, please, thank you for the work you do. I don't want you to think the questions I ask, I'm not supportive of prosecutions. And at times, I think they are very, very vital, because the impact on our children, if there are neglectful parents, and there are some, we need to protect the children from neglectful parents. And there are some neglectful parents. There are also parents who have very difficult challenges because of special education needs, but we do need to make sure those parents who are deliberately, willfully neglectful are dealt with.
Chair, may I say one thing? I just want to make sure that I've not been misconstrued. We're agnostic as well. I just want the committee to understand that fundamentally we are obliged, as it were, under the current framework. There is an obligation of us. I think it's absolutely right that there's transparency in terms of how we reach that decision. I think it's absolutely right that we have transparency, not just upon the approach, but the impact and either benefit or not of it to inform that decision. So I just want to make sure that I haven't been misconstrued in terms of the challenges.
Understand, and look, appreciate these are sensitive issues because the prosecution is it's a scary word, but ultimately I think we need to just ensure the conversations are focused on is what we're doing in this space, helping children to attend school and get the best outcomes when they're in that school, and that to me is where we should all be focused. Danny, you were really keen to come in on something on saying, and I am going to be really
it's a
brief.
point of clarity, just because we're going back and forth on the word suspension and pause. Look, I just pulled your statement up on the 5th of the 11th 2025, suspending referrals to external contractor providers, EOTAS Centre Services. That's the EA statement. User simple.
And sorry, it was the conflation, of that continuing, as it were, necessarily to June or not beyond that. I would just want to be very clear they're not connected.
So I'll not go back into the thing of it, but it wasn't a pause, it was suspensions.
David, you've waited patiently. I'll bring you.
Thanks very much. I'm probably happy to know, Chair. I probably only have one question, because a lot of the reassurance that I was probably seeking was Cathy actually touched on in terms of those families that have difficulties not being subject to those prosecutions where that's genuine and so on. Prosecutions, I have to say, I'm not particularly agnostic to. I think it's not a nice thing. Social service interventions in families where required is not a nice thing. Nobody wants to see it, but sometimes it's required, and I share what John has said, that there's parental responsibility, and unfortunately in life there are some parents that don't uphold their responsibilities, and that has to be dealt with at the very extremities of our system, and that's unfortunate, but the door should always remain open to that, I believe. So just put that on record. One more comment would just be to say, Danny was talking about healthy, happy minds and so on. I don't think anybody around the table has argued that that wasn't a successful programme or that it wasn't beneficial. It came with funding that was given for a particular reason from Westminster. That funding was removed, and we all know the pressures that the Department of Education and our executive are facing. Danny can talk to the Finance Minister if he thinks that there's pots available that can be made available to the Department of Education for those uses, maybe as part of the budget setting process, but we can see what happens there. My only question probably comes just to a comment was made earlier around action short of strike, and I wondered if you could speak to some of the unseen impacts. I wondered if you could speak to what impact action short of strike had on your work, particularly protecting those vulnerable young people.
I wasn't present in the EA at the time. I was probably seeing it from a different lens in other roles, and I don't want to. And I did live that, as it were. It was exceptionally difficult, I have to say, for everybody involved. It was difficult for parents, families, schools, and the staff involved. So it's a tough question to answer, but
well, it is. I suppose what happened was that there were, within the action short of strike, there were very clear things that staff wouldn't do. And that included a cap on the number of children that would be in their caseload. So where an EWO would have, say, 25 children in their caseload, they would not take any more of that. And if they had a child in court, a court case like this, then it would only be 20. So that had a real impact in terms of our waiting lists. So what we saw was we were finding it very difficult to get the throughput of cases, and that's very difficult where you have maybe, say, 2 or 3 children on one caseload who is on that caseload for 3 years or more. It means that the capacity was really, really reduced, and that created a backlog, which we are working very hard and have worked very hard over the summer, and I have to commend the team now because we've resolved it. We have a complete change in job description. We have an emphasis now on prevention, early intervention work rather than one-to-one referrals. So the way that they're working, I think they're, the staff are excited about. Morale is better. I'm not saying it's perfect yet, but where we were and where we are now is two different places. There's an excitement, there's an enthusiasm. People want to work through a trauma-informed lens. They want to work at whole school level rather than individual children level, albeit that I acknowledge that there are individual children who absolutely need one-to-one, that support. And I do come back to you and say that there are times whenever, we get notice that a child has slipped through, maybe that triage hasn't worked for them. And we will look at that situation again, so send that through to us. We're out the other side, I would say, and I think it's a win-win situation.
So you're confident then whatever impacts it was having, lamentables that may have been, you're confident that has been largely caught up by now? I
think the transformation will, we're year one of the transformation, so we're part of the, we're building our service again. I think we're probably going to see that the real impact, year 2, year 3. But we're in a much better place.
We can keep watching brief on that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Okay, not got any other indications, so that's the end of the evidence session. I think in terms of opportunities to discuss youth services, we probably are up against it in terms of time, but I think we'll follow up with communication on that. Look, thank you for your time. I know that these issues are difficult, and I think it is important we all just keep the focus that we all should be pushing towards ensuring children are in school and thriving in school, and that's the aim. Okay, thank you all for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, really good.
Thank you.
So, just in terms of finishing this agenda item up, are there any particular items for written follow-up or anything else that any members want to note? Yeah, Dana, you were looking at it.
Yeah, I'm struggling to see what the point was of an original statement talking about suspending referrals to the oldest centres, which I know had a massive impact because it's in my community. If it's to do with procurement after juniors, no mention of dates or anything in it, so that sort of didn't make any sense to me, to be honest. And then just follow the reason why I was mentioning those programs is just how successful and helping young people at that stage, particularly in primary school. And look, ministers do have budgets, we all know that. They can prioritise, like Transform Aid. I know they said it was only a drop in the ocean, £13 million so far spent. How much more kids could we help through Happy Meals instead of Transform Aid? I suppose that's an example rather than blaming the finance minister for everything.
In terms of the UTIS referrals, I mean, I think there was clearly a point of maybe confusion or uncertainty around pausing, suspending, and what happens the other side of June. So, I mean, I would certainly be content to propose that we seek written clarity on that, just to get that very clearly and to understand exactly where that sits if members are agreed.
And just for information, Chair, the Education Minister's getting an extra 214 million.
Well, that comes
out of that 400 million from Westminster.
Kathy?
Chair, it's just around that point about the exceptional teaching arrangements and not the EA, I mean within schools, and what is the EA's policy around that, because, and you alluded to as well, it's something that we're hearing time and again, it very much depends on the school, very much depends on the teacher. They need support, the schools and teachers need support and guidance on it. So they did reference that they would go away and look at it, which concerns me slightly that they're only going away to look at it. But if we could maybe get a starting point from them where it is now and where it needs to be.
I do think on that particular question around those arrangements that there was a very long preamble to the answer, and maybe we didn't get to the detail on it. So I think I would be keen to understand exactly what the framework for that is, because when it was referenced by Una around medical needs, I think that the lines start to blur when we have young people with mental health issues, and Una did begin to sort of indicate if that's protracted or long term, then that may not be appropriate. So it'd be really good to understand exactly how that operates and what parents should expect when they request those.
They're two clear,
arrangements.
two separate issues, but it was a bit convoluted there, I think. So
no, I think that would be helpful. I'm just going to note as a comment, I think some 3 things came out of that briefing of concern for me. There is no data on the impact on the child in terms of attendance on prosecution, and I think that is a matter of serious concern. I have to say, whether you're agnostic, supportive or opposed to prosecutions, if we're going to do it, we need to know what the impact is. I think John's point that there is no objective criteria that we can observe in terms of how decisions around last resort are taken with a prosecution, And then to Michelle's question around cost, that for 70 prosecutions, we don't have costings of how much that costs the EA. I was surprised that question seemed to come as a surprise. So I'm not sure if there's anything arising on that other than perhaps it might be worth putting in writing those 3 particular concerns around prosecutions and to ask for the EA to provide us with an update on what they're going to do to address those points of concerns. And they really, for me, they're around, if we're going to spend money and make interventions, we need to know what the impact on the child is. They need to be transparent, and we need to know how much they cost and what the value is. So I think those are all fair questions. If members are agreed, is there anything else anyone wants to add to that? No, agreed on that? Okay. So we're going to move into closed session with members' agreement for deliberation on the RSE report. Are members all content that goes into closed session?
Great.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, so we're back into open session of the committee. I'm just going to pass over to the clerk just to summarise the agreements reached in that closed session in relation to the RSE report.
So the committee discussed draft recommendations for its RSE report and subject to some tweaks, agreed positions on those recommendations. The committee will look at its full report
in the coming weeks, and will have a week of full notice before making its final decisions. And then, as regards reporting to the House on the report, the committee agreed that it did not feel that that was the most constructive way to publicise its report, and one member, Mr. Brooks, did not agree with that decision, but the committee decided not to go to the House with its RSE report.
And obviously, just to note, all of that will be subject to the sort of final decisions on the report when it lands, and that will all be dealt with in open session as is appropriate. Okay, so item 9 then on the agenda is correspondence. So you've got correspondence at pages 102 to 176 of your packs, and then there's also some additional correspondence in tabled papers with a summary note there at page 110 of tabled papers. I'll just reference anything that requires a committee decision or discussion. If there's any other items that I missed that members want to raise, please let me know. So item 9.2 on page 111, it's correspondence from an individual to the Minister, but he's copied in the committee raising concerns about the Education Authority's responsibility to fulfil all its mandatory statutory duties under Section 5 of the Disabled Persons Northern Ireland Act 1989. I would propose that we note that we perhaps let the Department and the Minister know that we have received that copy of that correspondence, and ask if that can be shared with committee when a response is provided, if we're agreed.
Right.
Item 9.4 on page 120 is a response from the Department of Education on the use of smartphones in schools. It is in response to correspondence that we had sent to the Minister. So happy to open up for discussion. My suggestion is that we would note and share the response with Smartphone Free Childhood, but very happy to hear from members if they have any other views. Agreed. Item 9.6, page 131, is a response from the Minister on the draft budget. And I think, as members may be aware, there have been some significant movements in relation to departmental finances over the course of the day, so perhaps appropriate at this stage to note, just given it is probably slightly out of date. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Item 9.8, page 135, is correspondence from the Department of Education providing a briefing paper on the independent review of teacher workload. Again, happy to hear members' views. I would have some concern that implementation across the range of actions is now not as clear as we might like. And I know from speaking to teachers and contact with the teaching unions, they're very keen to see, at least some items coming out of this with clear timelines for delivery in the short term. So if members agreed, I would want to suggest that we do write to the department and ask for clarity on which recommendations out of that long list they do consider can be implemented quickly, and where we could see delivery in the short term, if members are agreed on that, or if there's anything else anyone wants to draw out on workload.
We're hearing, and of course a lot of it's anecdotal, that there's a large degree of dissatisfaction with how the department is managing this, and I know that quite a number of teachers are recommending that the unions go back on industrial action, and that would be disastrous if that were to happen again. But if this issue isn't resolved for once and for all, that's the direction we're heading, I think.
I think it is important to note that this independent review of workload was very much a key part of getting a previous agreement over the line with the teaching unions. So I don't think we should in any way understate the importance of this. Well, is there anything in addition to what I've suggested that then we would like to raise with the department or minister in relation to that? I'm certainly keen to see what short-term interventions they can make that might help teachers get a bit of confidence back in the process. Is there anything else, Deputy Chair, yourself, that you'd want to raise in addition to that?
No, nothing I can think of off the top of my head.
Perhaps just to note our concern that there is maybe a lack of confidence growing in terms of implementation.
I suppose the case is too that there's a relatively short timeline to deal with this. Yeah. It can't be allowed to drag on and on and on. It has to be dealt with.
Yeah, given the history of previous workload agreements, which went that way, absolutely. Okay, I think we're agreed. Item 9.9, page 143, 9.10 on page 145. They're both submissions on the GTCNI bill. Are we content to add these to the committee papers for the bill? Agreed. Item 9.11, page 149. It's correspondence from an individual regarding the responsibility of schools to record data on attendance, absences and illness and provide this information to the Department of Education. So obviously very relevant to the briefings that we've had today in committee. Again, happy to hear members' views. I would want to suggest that we share that with the department, with the Minister directly if appropriate, and to seek their response on the specific concerns being highlighted, and to let the individual know that we've done so if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 9.12, page 153. It's a response from the Education Authority on community ownership of provision. So, I think we've had a discussion on youth provision at the start of the meeting. This is the correspondence. If I want to just get the right. This is the one that arose from the committee briefing from BITES and their proposals around how the service should be structured, and then we have the response from the EA. We are going to move, I think, towards getting a written briefing, so I'd want to suggest that probably we advise the correspondence that that's the committee action at this stage, if we're agreed. Agreed. And item 9.15, page 111 of tabled papers. It's correspondence from the Benedict Blythe Foundation on school allergy safety. Again, would like to hear members' views on this. I'm not sure how familiar members are with the full background of this, but the foundation arose from the tragic death of a pupil in relation to allergies in GB, and it's really looking at whether or not I think our department here has any intentions around policy development or indeed legislation around ensuring that our schools are safe places for children with allergies. So I would be certainly content to share that correspondence with the Minister to hear his views, if there's any other views. No, agreed. And I'm not sure if it has been tabled or not, but there was an invite. Has it been circulated with members?
It in the end.
Okay, so it's gone by email, and this is one where there's been an invite for me to speak at a conference on education for citizenship, which I had provisionally accepted, but there's just been a bit of a delay in the formal invite coming through to committee. Are members agreed that I attend that on the committee's behalf? Agreed. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note in your tabled papers? Great. Item 10 is forward work programme, so that's at page 178 of tabled papers. So I'll maybe just invite the clerk to speak to that in the first instance, and then if we do need to have a little think around anything that perhaps needs to move, if we are looking for a briefing from Youth Services. But I'll pass over to yourself.
Yeah, so we had filled up almost until recess, and we'd done some provisional work on timetabling the two private members' bills, which we're anticipating in March. The chair and I were having a discussion about what might move, and we've got a briefing on restrictive practices, which has been kind of long anticipated. First of all from Nikki and CLC, and then a couple of weeks later from the department. So potentially we could ask the department if they got something new to say on that date, and if not, take the Youth Services on that date. But we kind of are quite full up. Like already Jim has been approaching you to see when we can have the committee bill legislative items. You know, there's a raised paper already, and legal services advice on the committee bill, so we want to schedule that too.
The consultation finishes next week, does it, or this week?
Next week, I think it's the 20th, isn't it, Mark? Sorry, I put you on the spot. I think it's the 20th, Deputy Chair.
And then
and we were definitely
many consultations. Many have contributed.
3297.
Sorry?
3297.
3297, yeah. So we were, I mean, our engagement colleagues have been pushing out lots of videos from the chair and socials and things like that to promote it. And there has, I mean, I actually got a screenshot that showed that like thousands and thousands of people had liked, you know, an image of it, but not actually gone and done the survey. So it is reflective of a lot of
social media. Just
you know what I mean? People just only engage for a second and then
social media like signals.
But they're happening. Yeah, people obviously have replied as well. But yeah, so if you want to keep the momentum behind the committee bill, we'd need to schedule those couple of items and then move to drafting instructions.
So what are the next steps then after the consultation closes?
So you look at the consultation responses, the legislative competence advice, which is ready to whenever we get a chance to hear it, the RAISE report, which will probably just give you some more background on alternative approaches in other jurisdictions, good practice, all of that, and then you'll set out what you want to be drafted, so how you're going to achieve the aim of enabling all pupils.
And what sort of timeline are we talking about for that before we get to the drafting stage?
So I need the Bill Office to probably just pin down how long their service standards are to instruct a drafter. But you know, if we didn't have very many iterations, because it is a single objective bill, then you know it should be kind of in a 6 to 8 week period, I would have thought.
Well, I mean, my private member's bill was turned around in a fortnight, and had the second draft. It was in the Christmas period, but in total 2 drafts were done within 4 weeks. You know, so given that it's going to be a very short bill, I see no reason. I mean, the policy intent is very clear. I can't see how there would be any misunderstanding or ambiguity around the policy intent. You know.
I was going to suggest, would it be helpful even for next week if we could get something from the Bill Office to provide their best estimate of time scale, so once the consultation closes, what our steps could be to move to drafting. I think that would be helpful if we could get that from the Bill Office.
Just see, do we have to wait until the consultation closes before we get like the RAISE research and the legal?
It's actually ready, but we're only doing 2 briefings a week. It's just finding the time. So Jim has been contacting you all to see if you've got an additional slot in your diaries for that.
Okay.
But those things together will, you know, give you the meat for the actual drafting instructions. So you know what the outcome is that you want, and it's just working out the rudiments of, you know, how do you want this to be implemented and enforced, and what, you know, are there any circumstances in which you think it's not enforced?
So if we can get dates agreed for those additional meetings, really. At the point consultations closing, we could have had that legal advice and the RAISE material dealt with, so it would really be moving to the next step very quickly then. So.
Is Tuesday still the best day for everybody, really, for additional? Yeah, okay, we'll just get it done.
Okay, so the only other thing then is just around the if we are moving anything around, can I just check, I would be extremely reluctant to move the Children's Commissioner CLC briefing on restrictive practices. I think we potentially have parental input on that for that session. I really don't think at this late stage that would be appropriate. I wanted to check on the SEN regulations. We anticipate that they will be coming to committee.
They have actually, I think, been sent over by the department, but it was last night. Yeah, so they'll be
tabled for next week. It may not be required to have a briefing on the 25th on those, or do you anticipate that? Yeah,
they could come next week with an introductory.
If they come with an introductory briefing, so that might be a space we could do that. Or as suggested, if DE are not bringing anything substantially new on restrictive practices, to move that on a bit into the plan, we could look at that. And I would also maybe throw in there, if the pre-legislative briefing on 16 to 18 legislation is sort of a tick in a box, and maybe it's not as progressed as it needs to be before it would be brought to members, again, that could move forward. But if the department are saying plans are very advanced on that, then obviously we need to hear. But
yeah, so I'll check in with the people in the plan at the moment, and we'll try to prioritise the youth services if at all possible.
No, that'd be
and
great.
And is it both the department and BITES, or both EA and BITES?
It's EA and the department.
I
think that we need to hear from, because this is funding it is restructuring, and it is policy. So it's the three. If we could, anyone who's corresponded in this week's pack around youth services, if we could advise them that we are seeking those briefings, I think that would be very helpful. Okay. Are members content to endorse the forward work programme as drafted, subject to all those amendments? Agreed. Item 11 is any other business. Is there any other business? No. Item 12 is date, time and place of next meeting, and that is scheduled for Wednesday the 18th of February, 2 p.m. in room 29 and online. And that just leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29.